is the Awesemo NBA Deeper Dive, and I'm pretty excited here to be joined by my friend and yours, Gundacker, because we did a whole bunch of baseball shows together this year. We have not yet done a basketball show together, so this is going to be the first one we do. Hopefully the first of many, because I hope that we can get you on the schedule more often, talk about some of these basketball slates. I know you've had a pretty good start to the basketball season. How are you feeling about today's slate?
Today's slate, I guess it's different from site to site, but DraftKings really feels like they're kind of playing your hand for you at several spots. I know, anyone with a Twitter account in the DFS community has seen several obscene value potential plays. So I don't know how to feel about tonight. Usually I like to look at what could be volatile or even bad chalk, and I don't know how to disagree with most of these value plays. So I guess it's just for me, I think I'm going to plan on gravitating and latching onto some of these value plays and just maybe going different at the stud realm. But I don't know. I'm excited to chop it up with you. Never done NBA with you. So I want to see if you're as contrarian in NBA as you are for baseball.
No, not at all. Especially not on a slate like this on DraftKings, where there's some coaches in basketball who are just, no matter what the circumstances, I'm not going to play any rookie, no matter what kind of draft capital used on him. One of those coaches must have set up the DK pricing algorithm this year, because every single good rookie player this year, just every slate is like 4K-ish and below on DK. And I mean, that's what we have today. Also, you just run, optimal lineups over in Fantasy Crunch. You get like Chris Duarte pops up a whole ton. Scotty Barnes pops up a whole ton, because you got Duarte has had an incredible start to the season. He's priced at 3,900. Scotty Barnes priced at 4,000 after he blew up last night. So you just get to a point where it's like, come on, what are you doing here? Eventually, some of these guys who are playing substantial roles with big usage need to get some kind of more substantial salary. So we'll see where that eventually ends up changing. But at least for today, it's going to be hard to kind of avoid some of those chalk options. We could start right here, though. It is the Miami Heat playing against the Indiana Pacers. And let's start on the Pacers side of the game and Chris Duarte, who's going to look like a vastly different play on DK as compared to FanDuel. Because like I just mentioned, on DK, Chris Duarte is priced at only 3,900. Over on FanDuel, we have a much more significant price tag on him at where is it? That is the DK price tag I have in front of me again. But yeah, on FanDuel, he's priced at 5,500. Probably, I think even at 5,500, Chris Duarte is viable. I have him in my player pool. The 3,900 price tag on DK, let's start there. Is he the overall best value play on the slate?
In my personal projection, I actually have D'Anthony Melton kind of competing with him, getting a little higher. But yeah, it seems like it's a can't miss and very little pushback. You don't need a whole lot to satisfy that price point, especially if you expect him to be one of the highest owned players, man. If that dude gets 25 to 30, that dog just might hunt here. So short answer is it's up there. If it's not one, it's very close.
Yeah, and to me, so the initial build that I did, I have Chris Duarte as my most rostered player, and it's hard for me to get away from that on DK. We just consider the 3,900 price point, and you just look at his role so far to open the season. Yesterday's game went to overtime, so that's going to inflate his numbers a little bit, but he played 45 minutes, so he played 40 minutes even in regulation, and then before that opening night, he played 33 minutes. He has not been afraid to shoot the ball, even being a rookie, so 15 shot attempts in the first game of the season, 16 in the second. That's something that's really hard to ignore at a 3,900 price tag. I'm curious to see what happens with him once guys like Karis LeVert and TJ Warren get back into the mix for Indiana. But as of now, he might just force himself to stick in the lineup the way that he's been playing so well. The other guys who are standouts for Indiana, we have Miles Turner's coming off a crazy good game yesterday. He's not quite making it into my lineups. But Domantas Sabonis is a potential pay-up option. I don't like the matchup against the Miami Heat all that much. FanDuel, I'm not really getting to Sabonis. Here's what kind of gets me to some of my DK lineups, though, anyway. There's so much value on the slate that pricing doesn't really become all that much of an issue. And then also you kind of start to look at, all right, who are the high-priced options? Luka Doncic, Giannis Antetokounmpo. Okay, all fine and good there. But if you're trying to differentiate a little bit, I think it makes sense to get to Sabonis for sub 10%, just from a standpoint of everybody's playing the same value plays. If everybody's playing the same value plays and the same pay-up options, then you're kind of in a situation where, all right, now I have the exact same lineups as everybody. Sabonis, I think, is one reasonable way to spend up and be a little bit contrarian. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I mean, all this must have value. You got to spend that money somewhere. I could definitely we can lazily push back Sabonis, right? Third game in 4 nights, or is it third game in 4 nights for them, back-to-back overtime. There's plenty of reasons to push back, but if you're going to get them at sub 10% ownership with very viable range of outcomes to drop 50 plus fantasy points, I don't disagree with the sentiment that, yeah, he seems like he could latch on to the high owned can't miss value play and then offer you a little bit of leverage at the same time. Without ownership in mind, I'm kind of scared about his potential today. But one thing about this Pacers team through a couple of games, these starters are playing pretty heavy minutes. And Sabonis is one of the guys I got projected to kind of lean on the most minute-wise for minute projection. So, I mean, he does a little bit of everything. And if he could be a top 3 scorer on the entire slate, yeah, I got no quarrels with grabbing that at single-digit ownership.
Yeah, and then going through some of the other ancillary pieces on the Indiana Pacers, we currently have Jeremy Lamb, Justin Holiday, and Torrey Craig are all listed as questionable. We're going to need an update there, but I will say all these guys were listed as questionable yesterday and all ended up playing, so I suspect they're going to play again. If they're out, though, I don't really know what opens up a whole crazy amount of value. Maybe we just see Chris Duarte go out and play like 40 minutes again or something like that if all those guys are out. But how do you feel about this injury situation where we have Lamb, Holiday, and Craig all listed as questionable? Because as is, it is a pretty thin Pacers team without much of a bench.
Yeah, if those guys miss, it is going to be a lot of guesswork, especially, if we do see some dead legs in the first half. I would expect that not all of them would be out. If at least Jeremy Lamb was in, he's somebody that is a little cheaper than Duarte. Maybe he could pick up some peripherals full of role, but it's going to be a complete guessing game. But beyond that, they have Brad Wanamaker on the lineup, right? I don't think I would be excited to get to him in this rotation, but I would hope that they all play. You mentioned that they were all Q yesterday. They ended up playing, so I'm just gonna assume more of the same here until further notice.
Yeah, and I did happen to notice that our guy Butthole Jenkins is in the chat, and of course he always says cut the crap. Who's the best play on the slate? Now he's got nothing to say in YouTube chat. We already talked about Chris Duarte. I said that he's my favorite play on DraftKings. So. Take that, buddy. I took your ammo away. You got nothing to post and ask me about there. But let's jump over to the other side. And we have pretty key injury news here, which is Kyle Lowry is questionable to play for the Miami Heat today. He briefly left their last game early with an ankle/foot injury. He was able to return the game and played fine down the stretch. So it's a little unsure what the actual issues are. Maybe some that end up swelling up after the fact, but I take the questionable tag, at least as of now, as a pretty serious concern. So let's talk about the potential scenarios here and what happens if Kyle Lowry is out. My expectation is that Tyler Hero would end up starting, and that would make him then a really strong value play. But what do you think could be the ramifications of Kyle Lowry missing today?
Yeah, you would expect Hero to be the next man up here. He had a huge first game too. I don't want to overreact to the first game because it was a pretty lopsided game. Most of the starters didn't really see past the third quarter. But yeah, Hero would feel like the instant beneficiary. No more Kendrick Nunn on this team as well. So there is a real chance that Hero could be a 38-minute player if Lowry did not play, or even if they were a little bit more cautious with him. That would obviously take from I think he had like a 30+% usage rate in that first game, 36%. It would probably come down quite a bit. You might see Jimmy Butler benefit as well. And Bam Adebayo might pick up one of those games where he can have a high assist total as well. And this is a spot where these Pacers have been in some competitive games, and yesterday was an incredible shootout against a team that didn't have their best offensive player. So you wonder if the Heat could get into a shootout themselves here, much fresher legs, especially considering they didn't have to play 4 quarters in opening night. So if Lowry was out, he become somewhat stackable points per dollar. If you put a 3-headed monster, Hero, Butler, Adebayo, I'd be just fine with leaning on those 3.
Yeah, and there is potential for a little bit of fatigue on the Indiana Pacers side of the game. Like I just said, they played in overtime yesterday, and now it's a quick turnaround. They're playing another game against the Heat, so that could potentially be an issue. Also, if Kyle Lowry's out, I'm going to assume a little bit more usage goes to Jimmy Butler. Same goes for Bam Adebayo. Jimmy Butler also probably becomes the primary facilitator in the offense. We saw Jimmy Butler take on that role a lot for the Heat last year. He was oftentimes passive during the regular season just because he was playing more of a pass role. He ended up averaging 7.1 assists per game last year. That was a career high. Now that we have Kyle Lowry in the mix, I think we should see a little bit of a step back in assist rate for Butler. That could take off again if Kyle Lowry doesn't end up playing. Anything else from the Heat side of the game that really stand out to you, especially with this Lowry injury situation?
No, I'll probably never play PJ Tucker this year. He scared me in the first quarter last game. Every now and then Duncan Robinson will get hot from behind the arc, but there's so much value for, even less than him that I just can't justify it pre-flop from where I'm here. So it would just be Tyler Hero, who at 5,500 dead on both sides, I would probably really want Lowry to be out to click him. But other than that, no, it's just going to be the big three. If Lowry's out, Hero, Butler, Adebayo.
Yeah, and by the way, I don't presume that you knew this information, but guess which friend of ours said that PJ Tucker was the best play on the slate the other day?
Shout out Sean V. Huh?
It was Sean V. And when we're sitting, we're like, oh my God, Sean V is gonna have ammo to talk for the entire season. When right out the gate he comes by calling PJ Tucker a best play on the slate, which, hey, got to give him credit for this. PJ Tucker absolutely crushed at the start of that game, but then ended up being such a blowout that I'm not sure he scored any fantasy points after the first quarter. There was, I think he had like 8 points and 5 rebounds and a steal at the end of the first quarter. He finished with 8 rebounds, 8.6 rebounds and a steal. But things got really hairy for a second. He was trying to take side action from people in the chat and stuff like that, because he was confident that big game was coming, and he came pretty close if it wasn't for a blowout. Next game we have to talk about here, it is the Toronto Raptors at home against the Dallas Mavericks. And let's start on the Toronto side of the game, because once again, we have another underpriced rookie over on DraftKings, another guy who I talked to briefly on at the top of the show, and that is Scotty Barnes, who also has looked really good. And something else to think about with Scotty Barnes, remember at the draft, and none of us really know that much about draft and prospects. We all pretend we do when it comes to draft. We get outraged over picks on Twitter, and that was a big thing. The Raptors take Scotty Barnes over Jalen Suggs. Everybody's losing their mind. How could they have taken Scotty Barnes and not Jalen Suggs? Scotty Barnes has looked infinitely better than Jalen Suggs. We're only a couple games into the season, but Scotty Barnes looks very legitimate to me. And once again, on DraftKings, I have to play him as a chalk option. He's way underpriced. Him and Chris Duarte are my 2 overall favorite plays on the slate. Last night, Scotty Barnes scored 45 fantasy points against the Celtics, and DraftKings responded by pricing him down $500 from where he was priced yesterday. So 25 points, 13 rebounds for Scotty Barnes yesterday. Is he good chalk in your opinion?
Yeah, I got no pushback. I actually locked him in 20 lineups yesterday. I was a little bit scared about maybe, the Celtics sometimes can be a little scrappier on defense, but yeah, he absolutely was a pleasant surprise. Got to love the double-digit shot attempts. Game 1, maybe the ceiling was pushed down a little bit because he was in foul trouble. You saw yesterday when he's not in foul trouble, man, the potential for double-digit rebounds and 17 shot attempts is pretty crazy. And that's just like, at 4K, how do you push back against this type of volume and these type of minutes? So, he's got to be. I'm close to liking him more than Duarte just because of the peripheral floor. But yeah, he's on DraftKings. He'll definitely be one of my highest owned players.
Yeah, and once again, I don't see a way around it. But then talking about him from a FanDuel perspective, FanDuel is 5,100. I was about to say currently 5,100, but that price point is not going to change. Still going to be 5,100 a lot. But what could change is he's projected for 31.8% ownership. So even at an elevated price on FanDuel, he's projected to be one of the most popular plays on the slate. For me personally, I still think Scotty Barnes is viable at that kind of salary. However, I'm underweight to the field of that 31.8% ownership. So what do you make of Scotty Barnes and his massive difference in price between DK and FanDuel?
Yeah, I still think 30 would be viable in and of that price point, but with FanDuel introducing that multi-position eligibility, you might be able to get to some of those really heavy hitters in your power forward center spot, and there's a plethora of guard value. So if you can win the position, even if it's 2 positions with guys like Kat, Giannis, guys that can fill out those, you might just give those 30 points to the field and hope that you can replace it with a 50 or 60. I'm absolutely fine with that because the price point, if he dropped 30, that's essentially what you're going to need. And if that's going to be a pretty high owned just hit value play, then yeah, I'll try and get a little bit different there. Zig when others are zagging.
Yeah, and it's once again, I think it's a little bit of an overreaction on FanDuel that people are going that heavily towards him when he's at an elevated price point of 5,100. He's a little different when he's 4,000 on DK. That I totally understand. But once again, I'm a little bit underweight to the field on FanDuel at that current projected ownership. Now, the other guy on the Raptors that I really want to talk about is Fred VanVleet, who to this point this season has been a little bit underwhelming. First game of the season, he scored 27 fantasy points. Second game of the season, 37 fantasy points. But I really like the prospects of Fred VanVleet going forward as a DFS option, especially until we get Pascal Siakam back in the mix. So Fred VanVleet is somebody who I'm building my lineups around to an extent on both FanDuel and DraftKings. I have him in over 20% of my lineups, $7,600 on DK, $8,000 on FanDuel. Do you like Fred VanVleet tonight?
Yeah, I mean, this whole the pricing is so sporadic from slate to slate. VanVleet he was 69 yesterday, right? Had a rough go of it, but points per minute was kind of there. You look at the shot volume that he's taking and the potential assists, like you feel like it's going to go his way eventually. So I'm fine with that. 7,600 might be on edge. I feel like that would be how I would get a little bit different just because of all the guard value. Everyone's going to build bottom up from there. Yeah, if you start with VanVleet and go top down, that's one way to push back against the higher ownership at guard. And if VanVleet can lap one of those value players with the high minutes that we expect him to play, makes a lot of sense. I mean, I have less confidence in him at this price point since he hasn't like really shattered it, but I don't think we're gonna have to give up a lot of ownership capital to at least say we got there and still be live, even if he was just an average play.
Yeah, and the other thing to consider, even though it is the tail end of a back-to-back, the Raptors absolutely got blown out yesterday, and Fred VanVleet didn't have to play a massive amount of minutes, so I don't think that's going to be too much of an issue heading into today's slate. Now, on the other side of the game, it's the Dallas Mavericks, which means we have Luka Doncic to consider. There's basically an unlimited amount of value on the slate, particularly on DraftKings. So everybody could get to Luka. The question I think really becomes here is how much is he a priority on the slate relative to some of the other pay-up options? So we know a lot of people are going to be looking to get to Giannis. He is currently the most popular pay-up option. But in terms of some of these other expensive guys on the slate, and just to list some of them off now, we have Giannis, we have Karl-Anthony Towns, Paul George, Damian Lillard, Domantas Sabonis. How high of a priority is Luka Doncic to you relative to the other high-priced options?
So you mentioned the Raptors got smoked yesterday. Through 2 games, the Raptors have not been competitive. So to put this type of salary into a guy like Luka, you really need this game to be competitive versus, guys like Paul George that are likely to be in a more competitive game. Guys like guys that will have similar floors and not too distant ceilings. I think it comes down to, you think this game is close? I think I'm leaning towards the others, the PGs, the Cats of the world. But at the same time, if people are going to be down on Luka, especially after the night one kind of fall flat, Luka has every potential to be the highest raw point scorer on this slate. And if we're going to have so much value, put that money into something. And if Luka can be the slate leader in points with all this value, he's likely going to be optimal. So I wouldn't have none, but if we put him on the table versus some of those other guys, the Raptors and their inefficiency scare me a little bit more than the other teams. And you talked about Fred VanVleet. They got smoked yesterday and they still made him play.
Other side, they won by 1 million points.
Okay. You're right. Okay. Yeah. I read that backwards. Yeah, I'm leaning more towards the other people than Luka here, but Luka's fine. He can lead the slate in points.
Yeah, so the way I look at it, Fred VanVleet, even though the minutes were there, the usage was really low. He just didn't have to do that much on the court. So I think if the game was more competitive, he probably would have taken on a higher usage rate than 16.5%. So that's kind of where I look at it, where I don't think the fatigue should be too much of an issue for them on tail end of a back-to-back in a game that really wasn't all that competitive. They didn't have to exert themselves. But either way, eventually the Raptors are going to play in a competitive game. They have played 2 games. One that was a blowout loss. One was a blowout win. Right. One of these days, the Raptors are going to play in a close game, but we'll see. It should be today. Odds are it will be today. The spread is only 4 points for this game. Another guy who's of interest for me here with the Dallas Mavericks, Kristaps Porzingis, more so on FanDuel than DK because of his potential for the defensive stats. Now, with Porzingis this year, I'm of the belief that he should have a bounce back season. I know last year it got really ugly for him at times, and the opening game was certainly not much better, where the Mavericks ended up losing to the Atlanta Hawks 113-87. That overall limited the amount of minutes that we saw Kristaps Porzingis on the court. He played under 30. But I think that Porzingis still has all of the talent in the world. I was pretty high on him for best ball drafts this year. And I think he should have a good fantasy season if he stays healthy. And when are we going to be guaranteed to get Kristaps Porzingis healthy? Basically never, except for in the first week of the season. So at least for now, I'm going to remain high on Porzingis, more so on FanDuel than DK. Are you going to be on Porzingis as well?
I like the thought of him. I do. I'm not going to be as strong. Like DraftKings is 7,300. Like he can easily drop 40 plus. Sneaky guy for blocks too. He doesn't get a lot of credit for that. So being on the south side of 7K on FanDuel, where you do get rewarded for blocks a little bit more. Yeah, he's fine at 6,800. My median expectation here is probably just an okay play, but I'm with you. I don't want to give up on him just yet because he's still, in that first game, despite, some struggles, and we don't want to overreact to one game sample size. A lot of people have the Hawks as being a decent to strong defense. He still had a 25% usage rate, second to just Luka when they were on the court together. So, that's fine, and it gives him some handcuff viability on FanDuel as well. I'm a little bit more in like with them on FanDuel, just because the added bonus of some of the defensive peripherals and the little bit of a discount at the price point. But I'm not going to give up on him, but he's not a core play for me.
Yeah. And then also to talk about a question that Frankie Rodriguez asked in the chat, saying, why would somebody want to play somebody on FanDuel, but not on DK? The reason is because, number one, the prices could be different. Scotty Barnes is $5,100 on FanDuel, $4,000 on DK. Also, the scoring is different. So take into consideration somebody like who isn't on this slate, but Mitchell Robinson is a vastly different play on FanDuel on a lot of slates than DraftKings, just because he's somebody who has the potential to block a lot of shots and rack up defensive stats, which are a lot more valuable on FanDuel and DK. So there's a few different reasons to play somebody on FanDuel versus DraftKings. Also, the ownership could be different across the two different sites, which always matters. But all right, let's move on to the next game here. It is the Detroit Pistons at the Chicago Bulls, the new look Chicago Bulls. And I'm still not really sure what to make of Chicago. I know that they have a lot of players who have been good fantasy producers in the past, but it's just a lot of them. And it's kind of similar to the Lakers situation, where I don't know what the usage is going to look like for LeBron James, Russell Westbrook, and Anthony Davis this year. And I don't know what to make of the Bulls team for right now either. We've got Vucevic, Levine, Lonzo Ball, DeMar DeRozan. I don't know where everybody fits in terms of what the roles are going to be. I'm not super high on any of these guys for today. Lonzo was great yesterday, put up a triple-double against his old team. But is there anybody who's making into a lot of your lineups from the Bulls?
Lonzo was, he was good to me last night. And, you talk about good play versus FanDuel and DraftKings. I think 6,200 is still a little bit soft for Alonzo's true ceiling can be and what his probably median projection is. So I do like him a little bit more on FanDuel. Overall, though, I'm going to greens with you. It feels like the average game for the Bulls is going to be like everyone at these prices is okay, not necessarily slate breaking. But if one guy does slide through, and we've seen it in the first two games, Levine hit a 50 bomb in night one, right? And then last night, Lonzo did what he did. So they are going to be pretty sporadic. It's going to be a guessing game. But I do gravitate towards taking advantage of that Lonzo price, especially 6,200. And then another bump for his defensive peripherals. The guy averaged over 1.5 steals last year. That's a big boost for that FanDuel scoring. So I like him a lot on FanDuel. I didn't find myself making anyone else a priority. I still think Levine's usage is going to be high enough. It's likely going to lead the team in shots game to game, but his results going to be a little bit more volatile at 8+ K. I need the 50 or the high 40s, 50, and he's satisfied that in the first two games. So I'm not getting there, but only Lonzo is like rising to the top for me, especially on FanDuel.
Yeah, it's if for cash games, I certainly think Lonzo makes sense. I'll say that at his price point, it's 6,200 on FanDuel. He's also really popular, though. He's projected for 28% ownership. And I think there's other point guards I would rather play at that kind of ownership. I'd rather just get expensive at the point guard position, maybe spend up on FanDuel for somebody like a Luka Doncic or Damian Lillard, who are both lower owned on FanDuel. right now that we do have Lonzo's at 28%. Then we've got a couple other guys in the 20% range, D'Anthony Melton and Reggie Jackson. And that's really the chalk that we're looking at on FanDuel in terms of guards. So to differentiate a little bit, I think I'd go elsewhere, or if that ownership comes down, I feel better with Lonzo Ball, but more of a cash game play for me than GPP. In terms of ancillary players, the role guys on the Bulls, I just don't think there's enough minutes or usage to go around. So unless we see something like all of a sudden, hey, Alex Caruso is consistently playing, 32 minutes, I have to bring it. We're contractually obligated to bring up Alex Caruso every show around here. Then I'm okay. But I don't see myself, at least in the near future, rostering any of the Bulls role players. Is that the same situation for you?
I mean, even as is, Caruso's kind of cheap enough to have some darts with him, especially like we got an 8-point spread here. Detroit not projected to be pretty good. Bulls have been all right. If they lean on Caruso a little bit more at 3,400 on DraftKings, I wouldn't hate it, but yeah, he's the only guy that's on the radar for me if I had to stretch past anybody from the primary plays on the Bulls side.
And then on the other side, the Detroit Pistons, I think I can make this fairly short and sweet. I have basically no exposure to these guys on DK. FanDuel, I have a lineups, some exposure to Isaiah Stewart, but for the most part, this team is very low owned. I think for a good reason. There's a little bit of blowout risk here playing against Chicago. The other thing too is this Detroit Pistons rotation. I don't know what we're going to be able to expect from a night-to-night basis in the front court. Jeremy Grant, Sadiq Bey, Kelly Olynyk, Isaiah Stewart, Josh Jackson in the mix. There's a lot of guys they could go to. I don't think the minutes are going to be very predictable night to night. So this is a very low priority team for me. Actually, I think of all the teams on the slate, I probably have the least amount of interest in the Detroit Pistons. But do you see it any differently?
Nah, spin the wheel, make a deal. The front court guys, you mentioned Isaiah Stewart, like there's definitely worlds where on a different slate where I didn't feel like I needed to go 5-6K, like here and there, I'd take some shots here. But yeah, for the most part, Pistons are just a big pile of blah and very low in predictive value and probably low in ceiling. Jeremy Grant's big games are when he's the obvious usage hog for 37 minutes. And I don't know if I'm feeling that here.
Yeah, it's I think I'll ask you this question about the Pistons. Are they your least favorite team to target today?
Quick scroll. Yeah, just because the floor is really low and the ceiling's also really low, so there's not a whole lot of redeeming qualities.
All right, so moving on. Yeah, I'm on the same page. I just find this team to be pretty non-redeemable in terms of what they bring to the table. Next game on the slate, and here's one of my more interested teams to watch so far this year. That is the Minnesota Timberwolves at home is a pretty big favorite against the New Orleans Pelicans. I would like the Pelicans to watch if they actually had Zion Williamson in the mix, but he apparently weighs over 300 pounds right now, can't keep himself healthy, broken foot. He's out for an undetermined amount of time. On the Grizzlies side of the game, on the Timberwolves side of the game, Karl-Anthony Towns, he looks healthy. He's off to a great start of the season. We've got Anthony Edwards. He's showed all the promise that was expected from him as a potential number 1 overall pick last year. So to start the year, we've seen a massive amount of usage go to Anthony Edwards, 35.7% in the first game, 34.9% usage rate in the second game. So in terms of Anthony Edwards, Karl-Anthony Towns, I think these are the two guys on the team to really look at. They use up a little bit too much usage. D'Angelo Russell also for me to really consider anybody else. But what do you like amongst these pay up options on the Timberwolves?
Yeah, I think Cat is probably the guy I'm most likely to get to at a high level, just because other than like Precious Achiuwa, most of the value was a forward or a guard. So a lot of that money naturally is going to go into a center spot. Opening night looked really good. The Houston Rockets did not. The Pelicans so far, just 2 games, look like they have the 3rd worst defensive rating. That's going to be a number that adjusts a lot in the next 5 to 8 games. But perennially, we don't expect the Pelicans to be great on defense. So this could be a good spot for the T-Wolves here. I don't know that – when's the last time we've seen the T-Wolves as 7-point favorites against anyone? But yeah, Cat's at the top for me. But yeah, Anthony Edwards and D-Russ – at these prices, I feel like there's a little bit more boom potential than I would like to assume. But if I can get them low enough owned in bigger field tournaments, I'd spin the wheel on them. But Cat's easily my favorite T-Wolves from where I'm standing right now. And the lineups just fall a little bit more naturally because of those aforementioned value plays at forward and guard.
And then where does Karl-Anthony Towns rate out as a priority for you in the pay up options? Is he behind Luka and Giannis? Is he ahead of those guys? because we do have a handful of guys to pay up for, and something that we mentioned with all, especially on DraftKings, so many of the value plays are going to be chalk plays around the same. And I think we did see a pretty astute comment in our YouTube chat from who was it? Somebody said about differentiating on the high end. It was Gangrene said the best play on the slate is to differentiate at the top, which is something I agree with. And one of the ways you could potentially do that is by rostering somebody like Karl-Anthony Towns instead of a Giannis. Is that something that you're kind of looking to do to differentiate some of your lineups?
Yeah, I do like him. I like him more if I can, gravitate to someone else, maybe Brandon Ingram. But Ingram's carrying 17%. Yeah, I would think he could compete with Giannis floor wise, but the ceiling would always go to this Giannis side of the seesaw, especially like you mentioned. There's going to be games that are Anthony Edwards games, that are D Russ games, and those are going to take away from 30-point scoring nights from Cat. But yeah, just in a vacuum, getting a little bit different. Yeah, Cat here and there is going to have similar, if not better, production from a fantasy point scoring standpoint at lower ownership. So I could get that. I don't have him over Giannis. Right now, I have him fifth in my raw points, so that's about where he would be in priority. But he's neck and neck with Sabonis.
Yep, I think that is I think it's a reasonable enough way to look at it. For cash games, I wouldn't go to Karl-Anthony Towns. I'd go to Luke over him. I'd go to Giannis over him. But for tournaments, I think he's a good pivot option there. In terms of role players, I do have a little bit of a sneaky tournament option that's FanDuel specific, and that's Jaden McDaniels. We've seen him capable of putting up big defensive stats, and he did it on opening night where he played 25 and a half minutes. Could have been more if they didn't end up beating the Rockets by, it was 18 points or 22 points or something like that. But McDaniels ends up in his limited minutes, 4 steals, 3 blocks. A lot of those came in the first quarter. And something we've seen from him in the past, last year, he played not a whole bunch of minutes, but still in the time he was on the court, he averaged about a steal and a block per game at a cheap price on FanDuel, and the added bonus to defensive stats. If you want to take a stab at somebody who's starting and is probably going to be like 1% owned, I think McDaniels is a good flyer tournament play. Any interest in him as a contrarian option?
Yeah, I like the call out. Good little pivot to get a little different to some of the other forward guys. A little volatile, but yeah, the call out makes a lot of sense.
All right. Anything else you like here from the Minnesota side?
No. Malik Beasley eventually will be a good play at 5K time to time, but with the 4 youngsters they got between Cat, Edwards, Russell, and then you throw in Beasley, I feel like there's going to be they're going to be highly unpredictable. But unlike the Pistons we talked about, at least there's a ceiling that can win tournaments here. I don't feel like I get that a whole lot with the Pistons team. So the floor is low, but the ceiling's higher.
All right. Next side of the game, the other side of the game is the New Orleans Pelicans. But first, guys, today's show is sponsored by PrizePicks. If you're not familiar with PrizePicks, these are prop-based daily fantasy sports games. To go over there, you build a prop card, and you could play them in a couple different ways. There's something called a power play, where you don't have to, where you could pick any amount of props across different sports too. One thing that I really like about PrizePicks is, let's say that you have an expertise in a multitude of fantasy sports. They have everything at PrizePicks. They've had disc golf up there. They had Olympic sports. They've had highlight. So you go out and you can say, I like Jalen Suggs points on one day, and be like, I like Joe Schmo to have under 60 in disc golf, and all different kind of interesting fantasy sports options you don't get anywhere else. So there's something called a flex play and a power play. Power play, you have to hit all of your props, but flex play, you could go out and you could hit only two of three of the props you pick, and that would still end up netting you a positive return on your money. So head on over to PrizePicks. If you're playing for the first time, use the promo code Awesemo and you get a $100 bonus on your first deposit. And once again, they've got sports over there that are not available anywhere else. They've got literally everything over at PrizePicks. All right, let's talk about the New Orleans Pelicans side of the game now. And not a great start to the season for them without Zion Williamson, maybe as could be expected. I thought this was a potential breakout team this year, and then Zion goes out and gets hurt before the season starts, and then that kind of takes a lot of the wind out of the sails. But one guy who I think it should help is Jonas Valanciunas, who to this point, I don't think we've seen his full potential, just because the games that the Pelicans have played have not been particularly competitive. First game of the season, blowout, they lose by 20 points to the 76ers. Second game of the season, blowout, they lose by 16 points to the Chicago Bulls. in competitive games, especially without Zion on the court, I think we could see the ball go into the post more to Jonas Valanciunas. Should see increased rebound rate. So I think that Jonas Valanciunas as a center play is somebody that really stands out to me. Is that something you agree with?
Yeah, I think he's definitely one of my favorite center plays. Yesterday, he was my highest owned center on FanDuel. They did nothing to adjust that price and push me backwards. 6,300 is just a soft landing if he has an average game, and an incredible price point if he has one of those ceiling games. We cannot forget who J-Val is. This guy has been a point per minute kind of high engine guy, and he just hasn't had a team that really gives him a high allotment of minutes. And, you're looking through the tea leaves, that extension. I feel like this could be the opportunity here. And if the T-Wolves, challenge them to a shootout, this is probably going to be their best matchup in terms of team defense so far, the Sixers and the Bulls. So I like his upside here. I'm in love with the FanDuel price. I think the field ownership is going to reflect that. And you mentioned the volume, man. Game one, he only hit 3 shots, but he shot 19 of them. You're almost never going to see a center shooting 3 for 19. So if he's going to continue to get double-digit shot attempts, I'm going to continue playing him. He has a real shot to be an AK plus player. And even at 6,300, he's grading out as one of my best value plays.
I don't mind it. Also, then going down, we had the other day, Herb Jones entered the starting lineup, and Neil Orfield showed up in our YouTube chat just to ask us for information about Herb Jones, which I didn't know what to make of Herb Jones starting, and still somebody who I can't really have that much interest in. Herb Jones played a whole bunch of minutes as a starter the other day, actually got nearly 30 minutes, didn't do much in those minutes, only ended up scoring 14 fantasy points. So you might see Herb Jones pop in the starting lineup again, but there's enough value plays that I would not be going to Herb Jones. But anything else from a role player perspective that you like from the Pelicans here?
Role player, no. I mean, we don't consider Devontae a role player, right? But I think per points per dollar per minute at 5,500, I could get to him in Mansfield, and then Ingram, who's also not a role player, I could get to him as well. But little shaky past that. So no Herb Jones for me right now. Najee Murphy, Trey Murphy, they keep looking okay in my projections, but I'm just not going to get there until I'm way wrong one night.
Fair enough. I can tell you that one of these days, Herb Jones is going to go off and make me look like an idiot by scoring a bunch of fantasy points, but it is not going to be tonight. Let's move on to the next game on the slate, which is the San Antonio Spurs at home against the Milwaukee Bucks. Now, the Spurs this year, without DeMar DeRozan in the mix, without LaMarcus Aldridge there, I know Aldridge wasn't there for a lot of last year, but he was somebody who for a long period of time was a usage monster for this team. There's a lot of fantasy production. There's a lot of playing time. There's a lot of usage up for grabs. Ultimately, I think a lot of it's going to go to Derek White and DeJounte Murray. Now, the Spurs' first couple of games of the season, once again, they haven't played in the most competitive of games. So we saw the first game of the season. We saw the Spurs beat the Magic 123-97. Second game of the season was a little bit more competitive against the Denver Nuggets. They ended up coming back to make it a little bit closer late, but the outcome was never really in doubt. I really like Derek White this year. He's somebody also who I'd have a ton of exposure to in best ball. I think he's going to pick up a lot of the role that was left behind by DeMar DeRozan. So Derek White, somebody who I've been on to start the season, I'm going to continue to be on until his price goes up to a really high number. But is Derek White somebody that you also like this year and tonight?
Long-term, yeah, I'm in on him for tonight. I do like targeting, the 3-point shooters against the Bucks. So I guess he would kind of satisfy that role. So yeah, I guess I'm on. I wasn't really on him, but now that you mentioned, I'm looking at my projections. They're fine for him. So yeah, maybe I'll sneak him in there, and they'll look to him to kind of pick up some of that scoring from behind the arc on a back-to-back.
Yeah, and I think so. Looking at Arcathelza saying in the YouTube chat that he rarely plays the Spurs because Popovich does dumb shit all the time. Which, hey, I think that is fair. However, that's more fair when there's a player out and we don't know who's going to be starting for the Spurs, and then it's some weird player ends up starting and then they go to the bench 2 minutes into the game. For the season, though, DeJounte Murray and Derek White, I'm fairly confident these guys are going to play big roles basically every night. It's once somebody gets injured, things get a little dicey with the Spurs, but that's not something we really have to worry about right off the bat. One other guy who I really like, particularly on DraftKings, Jakob Poeltl's only $4,900. I think that he's in line for a pretty big role this season. 30 minutes in the first game of the season, 26 minutes in the second game. He's always been a guy who scores about a fantasy point per minute. If he is going to continue to play around 30 minutes per game, he needs to be a guy who's priced over 6K. So Jakob Poeltl, I think, is another viable value option. I'm a little bit overweight to the field on 4,900 on DK. How do you feel about Jakob Poeltl?
Yeah, I'm fully agreeing. It's point per minute guy. If you're going to lean on him for around 30 minutes a game, absolutely a rock solid floor at 4,900. You can push back a little bit more, 67, that the back-to-back enigma and the Bucks, but 4,900 is a little too cheap, and there's a lot of room for upside at that number.
And anything else from the Spurs that you really like here? We've got some people in the YouTube chat mentioning Keldon Johnson. Not by any means a core play for me. $4,900 on DraftKings. I think that is certainly a viable price point to get to. He's also only 15% owned. On FanDuel, 8% ownership at a little bit more expensive a price point, 5,700. 5,700 price tag, that's a little steep for me for Keldon Johnson. I could see it at 4,900 on DK, but how about for you?
Yeah, so Keldon Johnson is interesting. You mentioned Popovich and minutes. I think the getting pop thing is a little bit outdated. It was years and years back. We haven't really seen him really go crazy unless there's a guessing game on who's starting when somebody's out. But Keldon Johnson did play 37 minutes yesterday, and that's a cheap price tag if he's somebody that could be afforded that many minutes, right? Minutes equal money, and that's a lot of doggone minutes. So I don't hate the thought of him, but game to game, I don't know how high his floor is going to be. But if this becomes a fast-paced game, he's going to have to go out there and get those hustle stats. I don't think, much like Jakob Poeltl, I think 4,900 is a big enough price point if we can get 35 plus minutes a game.
And if you remember, the reason that the Popovich started about him being unreliable, he was the first coach to start resting players in back-to-back situations. So this rest thing, which is something that every team does now, originally people were saying like Popovich is resting guys when they're not hurt. Like we need to get this guy fired. Then just every team started doing it afterwards because they found out that it was a good course of action. But yeah, there was a point in time. I remember back in the day when I'd first started working at Basketball Monster doing DFS content, there was this whole outrage of people for fantasy purposes were like, this Greg Popovich guy shouldn't be allowed to be a coach anymore. He's washed up. What he's doing, resting guys who are healthy. And then, maybe that's the reason why Tim Duncan was able to play so effectively into an old age. Same with guys like Tony Parker and Manu Ginobili. But yeah, as long as he has a younger team, I don't think he should be doing anything too crazy. Unless, of course, this game ends up being a total blowout, then we might not see starters in the fourth quarter, which is possible because on the Bucks side of the game, the Bucks are likely going to be one of the best teams in the NBA this year. They are expected to have Drew Holiday back from injury today. However, we have Bobby Portis out, Brook Lopez out. Let's start with Giannis on the high end. To me, in cash games, if you're only paying up for one guy, Giannis is that player. Is that something you agree with?
Yeah, he has the highest raw projection for me at the moment. And with the slate that just has so much value, it just seems like you're doing yourself why would you not? So yeah, in cash games and short field, stuff like that, I really got no pushback on Giannis. He's the guy that's going to likely exceed point per minute production, and maybe even a couple more peripherals go his way with Brook Lopez out because he represents a lot of rebounds.
What's funny though? So I have to bring this up now. So Brook Lopez in himself, he does not grab rebounds. However, every team he's been on his entire career, the team has a significantly better rebound rate when he's on the court than when he's off the court. So I do think he sets up rebounding opportunities for his teammates because I think that he effectively boxes people out. Because if you look at the data at least, and it's been across different teams, right? He's been on the Bucks, he's been on the Lakers, he's been on the Nets, he's played with all different combinations of players. So I actually think that him being out kind of potentially hurts Giannis's rebounding potential just a little bit. But that aside, it doesn't matter. We're playing Giannis and Antetokounmpo on this slate. As for the other role players on the team, Jordan Nwora, I'm a little sketched out on his minutes. I don't know that they're quite as secure as maybe the field thinks. I'd rather get to guys like Scotty Barnes. I'd rather get to Chris Duarte on DK. So Jordan Nwora played 26 minutes last game. He played 26 minutes in opening game. But don't forget, Drew Holiday missed the majority of the first game of the season. Drew Holiday was out all of the second game. I think it's not unreasonable to think we see Nwora's minutes ultimately go back to the 20 to 22 range. I think he's going a little bit over-owned today, but what do you think of Nwora?
So I like Nwora from a per minute standpoint, but if you just look at game logs, I think he caught 5 or 6 minutes in the fourth quarter of that complete blowout when they had essentially thrown in the white flag. So if if now you put Drew Holiday on the court, you accept that Giannis is at the 5 here. There's a world where Giannis minute projection could be closer to 20 than 30. And at that price point, easily snap call Scotty Barnes, who there's no question of what we should expect or project him to be at.
Yeah, and so I think there's just better source of value today. Jordan Noir, fine to get a little bit of exposure to him, but not somebody who I'm dying to play. As for Chris Middleton and Drew Holiday, I'm kind of feeling like I'm not going to be getting to the mid-range very much today. At least I didn't in my initial build. The main reason being is there's so much good value on the slate that I think this is a really good spot to go stars and scrubs. That means guys like Chris Middleton and Drew Holiday ultimately just kind of get cut from my lineup because salary restrictions aren't all that much. Are you finding yourself getting to guys like Middleton and Holiday?
I'm on the fence with Middleton. Holiday at 6,500, I feel like there's a little wiggle room on DraftKings, but neither one of them will be promoted to a priority unless something wild happens with Giannis pre-lock. But yeah, right now I think they're just kind of in no man's land if we go the designated studs and scrubs approach.
All right, 2 games left to talk about. But guys, don't go anywhere when Gundacker and I are done because we do have the NBA Live Before Lock coming up after. Also, do us a favor, hit the like button. Also, subscribe to the YouTube channel because we've got all kinds of content on the channel. We've got NASCAR, MMA, NBA, MLB, winding down to the season. But of course, we've got all the NFL needs covered, college football also. So really everything going on. I think the other day we had Joey Corn told me it was 13 shows on the YouTube channel, which was a record number for us. We've got absolutely everything going on here. You want to be subscribed to the channel so you know when that's going on. Also, for the start of the NBA season, we do have a promo going on. If you use the promo code Curry at checkout and you are a new Awesemo Plus subscriber, you'll get 50% off your first week of Awesemo Plus. So that's a very cheap price, and that deal is running out soon. That is only going to run through Monday, October 25th. So if you're looking to get in and try out some of the tools we have at Awesemo, go use the promo code Curry at checkout. Get yourself 50% off your first week of Awesemo Plus. Now let's bang out the last couple of games of this slate. Next one here is the Portland Trailblazers at home against the Phoenix Suns. The Suns coming off a great win over the Los Angeles Lakers that literally had this team in tatters. We got Anthony Davis and Dwight Howard fighting. We've got me tweeting about the potential of the Lakers missing the playoffs this year. By the way, they were plus 1,300 to miss the playoffs yesterday. Now they're all the way down to plus 600, depending what book you look at. So people are starting to bet the Lakers to miss the playoffs at this point. This spot for the Portland Trailblazers, I don't really love rostering players against the Phoenix Suns that much. If you want to pay up to be contrarian, go with Damian Lillard instead of guys like Giannis and Luka. That's viable, but a low priority option for me. CJ McCollum's a no-go for me. Norman Powell's a no-go. Robert Covington. Is there anything that really stands out to you from Portland?
The thing that stands out to me is their Vegas team total. That seems a little aggressive against the Suns, but no, I'm kind of with you. I think 10 plus K on Dame seems a little strong versus what else we can get on the slate at the same price. Not too far from Luka, but right there on guys like Paul George. So yeah, no Dame for me. McCollum did show some snap at 7,400. Maybe somebody's got to be running past screens and chucking shots successfully if this game stays as competitive as projected. So maybe McCollum, but no priorities here. They feel like a little more expensive Bulls in terms of what their situation is, where you might get some decent floors and every now you get pop at ceiling, but I don't think we're getting a huge discount on their price point to gamble on their ceiling. I think when Dame starts regressing to closer to 9K, that's when I'll be a little bit more interested, but not tonight, not against the Suns.
Yeah, and so I have a fairly good projection on Jusuf Nurkic for today, and he's somebody who I am pretty bullish on this season. But here's one issue I have here is, once again, it's that same issue I had with somebody like Drew Holiday or Chris Middleton, is I just don't need to roster guys in that upper mid-tier price range when there's so much value on the slate. So I'm finding it difficult to get to Nurkic, even though I project him for a little bit over 40 fantasy points, which should be good. It is kind of salary, but it just doesn't matter all that much on this slate when I could get up to guys like Giannis and Luka and Karl Anthony Towns without much of an issue. On the other side of this game, the aforementioned Phoenix Suns taking on the Portland Trailblazers. Phoenix on the tail end of a back-to-back. I'm always a little scared of playing Chris Paul on the tail end of a back-to-back, especially this early in the season. The matchup against Damian Lillard is terrific. Lillard is one of the worst individual defenders that we have on the perimeter in the NBA. So it's a couple of things kind of conflating with each other from the standpoint of I don't really like to play Chris Paul on the tail end of back-to-backs. And then I like to pick on point guards against Damian Lillard. So which side of it do you fall on?
I just think the price is right on the nose. So even if he, gets 40 on either side, AK 7,500, feels like he's a good play individually, but I can probably live without it, going elsewhere. So I'll probably just stay away from Paul at this point. You mentioned the back-to-back. Greg, am I the only one spooked at Portland being like favored with this high of a total? Am I missing something? I'm looking at the injury report.
They're good. It's two things. They're good, and Phoenix is on the road on the tail end of a back-to-back. Like, that's always pretty significant to a spread. But also, the Portland Trailblazers are a legitimately good team this year. And I think that one of the things that kind of misconstrues the public perception of Portland is there's just these made up rumors that Damian Lillard didn't want to be there in the offseason.
Yeah, I don't know.
No matter what, like Damian Lillard said a million times, I want to play out my whole career in Portland. I don't want to be traded. I want to be here. He got in an argument with Henry Abbott, I forget who, maybe he writes for ESPN now or something like that, where Henry Abbott had reported that Damian Lillard had asked for a trade and that he was going to not show up for training camp. Damian Lillard outright disagreed with him on Twitter. He goes, "That's not true. I don't know where you get your information from." They argued about it, and the public just agreed with Henry Abbott. They're like, "Oh, look at this Henry Abbott guy knows what he's talking about." And nobody was not nobody, but the majority of people just ignored everything Damian Lillard said and said, "Oh, he wants to be traded. This team sucks." This team does not suck. It's a good basketball team. Is the fit with CJ McCollum and Damian Lillard ideal? No, not really. I think they'd be better off getting, maybe like a lower usage defense first guard to play alongside Damian Lillard over McCollum. But as long as Nurkic is healthy, Dame's healthy, McCollum's healthy, Powell's healthy, like this is probably a top 4 or 5 team in the Western Conference. So since it's a tail end of a back-to-back, I don't really have any issues with it. And the other thing I'll mention also is I wouldn't be surprised if Chris Paul's minutes are limited a little bit with this being a tail end of back-to-back and early in the season due to his health history.
Yeah, it was kind of like me wondering if they expect some secret squirrel stuff going on. I think the Blazers are good, but watching that Kings game, I was wondering, but it's way too early to overreact.
Yeah. So, I mean, for me on the Suns side of the game, if I had to play one player from the Suns, I think that you can make a case for DeAndre Ayton if you want to take a chance on Chris Paul, which I'm not going to be doing today, but he does have a good matchup against Damian Lillard. Devin Booker is somebody who I kind of land on from this standpoint. If I think Chris Paul could potentially be a little bit limited on the tail end of a back-to-back, it would just kind of make sense that you go to Devin Booker in what should be a positive matchup against the Portland Trailblazers. The total for this game is 229.5. That is the highest total on the slate. So we have to expect points are coming from somewhere here. Devin Booker is somebody that I like as a little bit more of a contrarian option today. Devin Booker currently projected for, let's see, where is his most recent ownership? I want to make sure that nothing has changed since we've been on the show. But Devin Booker projected for ownership in the teens over on FanDuel. On DraftKings, we have Devin Booker projected for, in the most recent run of ownership, let's see, Devin Booker coming in sub 10%. So both those, I think, are numbers that are fine to be overweights to the field on. Those are very low ownership projection on Devin Booker. So that's my upside GPP play in this game. One game left to talk about. It is the Los Angeles Clippers at home against the Memphis Grizzlies. No Kawhi Leonard for the Clippers, potentially all year, certainly not at the start of the year or anytime soon. So as a result, we saw Paul George take on a massive amount of usage towards the tail end of the playoffs last year, but also in the opening game of the season against the Golden State Warriors. We saw Paul George put up a usage rate north of 30%, ended up scoring 29 points, 11 rebounds, 6 assists. Where does he fit into the picture of other stars on the slate for you?
He is one of my top 3 favorite plays in terms of raw projection. I have him third in my projections to Giannis and Luka. I haven't adjusted this in like 2 hours, so there's a world where a cat can jump him. But I like him quite a bit, and this game feels like one of my favorite game to target. I think there's a lot of opportunities, points per dollar on both sides. But Paul George definitely is top 3 for me right now in targets.
Yeah. No, I know what you mean. No, and the audience knows what you're talking about as well. Paul George, I certainly think is a pay up option. A little more favorable for me on DK than FanDuel. FanDuel, the 10,200 price tag is pretty steep for Paul George. I'm underweight to the field on. I have to shout out my guy though. Eric Bledsoe is back, baby. Eric Bledsoe, opening night. Eric Bledsoe plays 30 minutes, 25% usage rate, scores over 40 fantasy points. He is 5,300 over on FanDuel. On DK, the price point that we have on Eric Bledsoe, he is at 5,900. I think for the ownership on him, we're looking at 2% on DK, 5,900 price tag. Listen, Eric Bledsoe has had an underrated career, and I know that most people don't like him because he sucked in the playoffs. But you know what it's not right now? It's not the playoffs. It's the start of the regular season. Eric Bledsoe was a big role on this team, as we saw on opening night. I like Eric Bledsoe as a contrarian option, and people can't make fun of me, at least for this one time, because Eric Bledsoe was good on opening day. But I'm going back to Eric Bledsoe again. But Eric Bledsoe, how crazy am I for sticking on him?
I think you're crazy because the minutes are there for him, and a little veteran presence. But I don't know how often he blows this price point out the water on either side. But with the absences this year versus last year, it could be more often than we think it is. To start the season. So if you're a Bledsoe truther, go for it. I got him being an okay value play 5-6, which is what you need. 30. I got him at 34 FanDuel points.
Yeah,
so that would be good.
we take last year, I think last year was just a horrible fit for him in New Orleans, a team without much floor spacing. This year he's playing around more shooting. If we take last year out of the equation, we go back to his salaries the last time we saw him, in Milwaukee, when he was a pretty good fantasy player and also had more of a bigger role around piece to fit. He was regularly priced 7,000 plus. Remember, there were slates where Giannis out. Everybody played Eric Bledsoe, and he was always a good chalk play. I think that one bad year and some bad playoffs, everybody just kind of built into this narrative that Eric Bledsoe sucks. I don't really think that's the case. So Eric Bledsoe, I'm going back to the well today. And at least as of now, it appears the field is not going to be going there. Reggie Jackson, also somebody I think is a viable play for this slate, although he's pretty expensive on DK. Let's talk about the Memphis Grizzlies now to wrap up the show. And I don't think there's a whole ton to love here. I like Jaren Jackson Jr. as a breakout candidate this year, so I'm going to be getting to him. D'Anthony Melton, I think, is a good value play on DK. But what stands out to you about Memphis?
So 8,500 on FanDuel for Ja Morant stands out to me. I like correlating him and Paul George in a little batch of my lineups to maybe get not quite the Curry Paul George game, but Ja Morant, he's getting it done. 30 plus minutes played. I know we're all excited to play D'Anthony Melton, Desmond Bane with Dillon Brooks out, but I mean, how often can we confidently project many of these Grizzlies? If you look at the last couple of years to get 30 plus minutes, I got closer to 35 minutes on Morant right now. I think 8,500 is a little too soft for me on FanDuel because I do think, 50 plus fantasy points is a real outcome here. So I love firing Ja Morant and Paul George. You might have to wait a bit, sitting in the back of your tournaments tonight. But that's my favorite correlation on the slate. Melton obviously stands out massively on DraftKings for me, grading out as a huge play. And Desmond Bane as well. I prefer Melton in the seesaw there. And then Jaren Jackson Jr. 6,200 on DK can satisfy that price point pretty easily. Normally, I'm not a Steven Adams guy. 4,600 though does leave a little bit of potential. In a way, I could play all of these Grizzlies. I might have to make sure the opto limits to like no more than 3.
Yeah, and I think I undersold Melton a little bit when I was introing it because he is, for cash games, I think you absolutely have to play Melton on DraftKings at 3,800. I do have him projected for mid-20s fantasy points. I'm a little concerned about his minutes just because we've never seen him really get big minutes that often in the past, but they were there on opening day, and as long as he starts, I think it's going to be the case. So Melton, one of the better value plays on the slate. I prefer Scotty Barnes and Chris Duarte to him, but still, I think Melton right in the mix, and I think if you're going stars and scrubs build, Melton, Duarte, Scotty Barnes, and you kind of pay up for wherever you want. Guys, that is going to do it for Gundacker and I, but don't go anywhere because Live Before Lock is coming up next. Do us a favor, like the video before those guys get on so they don't think they're getting all the likes, so all for them.
morning, Awesemo basketball fans. How's it going out there, everybody? We appreciate you sticking around. Hopefully you enjoyed the previous show. We're here with the Live Before Lock. We're going to break everything down, keep you up on all the news, any player changes, anything like that. We'll go through some of our favorite picks for this exciting slate. I'm Terry McBride. That's Matt LaMarca. Matt, how's it going?
It's going pretty well. I'm a little upset they didn't tell me I was going to be working with a Yankee Giant fan, but, we'll make the most out of it.
Hey, look, that's, you get to work with somebody pretty perfect. And, I appreciate you saying so and calling it out at the top of the show. That's awesome. Thank you, buddy. And right back at you. What are your teams? I'm not aware of your teams off the top of my head.
I am a Mets-Jets fan. So,
all right. All right.
Yeah, we're not like diehard rivals, but there's definitely a lot of jealousy on my side for sure.
It's that like healthy sibling rivalry, for the younger brothers and our friends who usually come from like the Long Island area and play out in Queens have that a little bit of that going on with all the titles on the other side of town. But hey, we get it. We understand. We love you guys. So it's cool. So anyway, we're brought to you by PrizePicks, you guys. Great site, big sponsor of ours. We're going to get into them a little bit. You heard Greg talking about it a little bit on the previous show here. Give us a like, give us a subscribe. We're not going to beat you about the head, but if we come out of this show with a bunch more thumbs up than the previous show, we'll look good for it, and we appreciate it. Got some free stuff on the site. Let's see what we've got out there for you this week. Week 7 NFL player rankings. And tonight, the NBA Boom Bust Tool. I was talking in the chat on the previous show. If the Boom Bust Tool is free, that's like giving you guys free money. If you can't win with the Boom Bust Tool, you're just doing DFS wrong. So pull that thing up. It is free. We're going to be going through some of those picks tonight and some of the best looking plays on there. We'll talk about it during the show so you hear how to use it, but that's a dynamite piece of content to have for free. NHL ownership projections are free for anybody who's into hockey. UFC pro plays for anybody watching the fight. A lot going on. Like, subscribe, a lot of free stuff at the site tonight. So, Matt, let's get into this slate. Let's talk about this a little bit instead of going through plugs and promos. What are we thinking just kind of off the top? We've got a couple minor, we were saying this before the show, right? This is one of those slates where kind of quiet, hopefully not quiet before the storm. Hopefully it's not one of those, unknown unknowns, but we've got a couple unknown unknowns right now. One of those that I noted is Kyle Lowry, questionable still last I saw. To start there, we've got Dylan Brooks is out. We've got a little bit of a question mark on exactly what the minutes are going to be like in Memphis. We've got some news on, I think the Pacers role players for the most part are going to be playing, and it was kind of minor guys there. Anything there out of that group or any others that's really stand out to you injury-wise that people should be keeping their eye on?
Yeah, I would say Lowry's the biggest name for sure. If he's out, that opens up maybe Tyler Hero, some extra shots for him. Jimmy Butler, we've seen him, kind of do everything for the Heat over the last few years. So that's a big one to monitor. And then Drew Holiday, probable. You would normally say like, oh, probable. Okay, he'll be in there. But he was probable in the last game and actually got ruled out well in advance. So I do think he probably returns tonight, but obviously if he's out, that's going to open up a little bit of value with some of the Milwaukee guys.
Yeah, and we're seeing a couple of those guys with a little bit of value on the board as it's currently configured. So, maybe we squeeze a little bit more out of them. They become a little bit interesting as it goes on. So we'll keep an eye on that one as well if there's any news for Drew. I think it seems like he's going to play. I agree with you. It seems like he's going to go. But, yeah, that's a tricky little injury, and you never know, those last-minute status changes that we love all the time here. So just taking a look at the board, we'll start out. We'll go, kind of position by position like we do on Live Before Lock here. We'll start out with the guards. It's a little bit fun to go through some of these categories now because both sites, Greg and I were talking about it, both sites now have multi-position with FanDuel adding it this year. I think it's great for what it does for the sites and for the flexibility of being able to create rosters. I think it's a more dynamic, more fun contest to play in. But for our purposes, while we're talking about this, it makes it a lot harder to sort these things. So I'm just going to kind of throw all the different guard plays into the mix. So I sorted by anybody eligible at either guard spot on FanDuel. That brings in some guys who are also small forward eligible. It might have left a couple guys off the table in the on the DraftKings when the positions change site to site. But I think we got a pretty good representation within that group. Who's your favorite play? We've got a couple really strong value plays. We've got a bunch of guys in the mid-range, and then we've got a few stars in that group as well. So where do you like to go first? What's your first click in making a roster for? Let's focus on tournament builds.
Yeah, I think the question you have to ask yourself is, do you want to consider some of these big name stars? I think you could get, moderate ownership on some of these guys up at the top. But none of them are really popping as like great values in our models. So or our projections. So like, there's a reason why they're going to carry low ownership. It's something to think about for sure. I think the first name for me is DeJounte Murray. I really like Murray tonight. There's a lot of minutes and usage available for the Spurs, given all the roster turnover they've had over the past year or so. And Murray seems like one of the guys who's going to be asked to step up and fill that void. He scored at least 37.75 DraftKings points in both games to start the year. The Bucks, we know that they've tend to play at a fast pace. So even though they're good defensively, they do tend to be a good fantasy matchup just because of the sheer pace that they play at. So he's popping as a really nice play in our boom bust tool. You mentioned that's free today. He's got one of the top leverage ratings on DraftKings at 12% right now. He's showing up in the optimal nearly a third of the time. So I think Murray for me is like one of the stronger guard options tonight.
Yeah, I like that call a lot. He's up near the top of my board. I've got the site's boom bust tool. He's at the top of the board by optimal lineup rate on DraftKings among these players. He's right there on FanDuel. What I really like about it is it doesn't seem like the public's getting to him a lot. Significantly positive leverage on both sites. So when you get a player like that under-owned, getting a significant amount of usage. His usage is up over 2 games at 26.9%. He was a 23.1% usage player last year and saw 1.11 fantasy points per minute. This year at 26.9, he's up at 1.21. So you're kind of getting what you would expect out of him so far. I really like that call. That's one I'm definitely going to have quite a bit of. One of his teammates is also on the board for me, and I'm curious how much you're getting to him, and I'm curious if you're getting a lot of them together and how willing you are to get to him together. And that's Derek White. He's coming up quite a lot for me. He's a different story a little bit in that he has negative leverage on the FanDuel slate. He comes up positive on the DK slate, where he's going to be 5,900 and owns a decent amount, but not to the extent that we're getting him optimal. So I like to play a little bit more over there. He's getting a lot of ownership, approaching 40% ownership. We'll probably get to 40% by the end of the show on the FanDuel slate. Still comes up significantly optimal, but it does push him into negative leverage. What do you think of White? And then what do you think of like the combination playing the two of them in the same lineup?
Yeah, it's a good question. They are negatively correlated historically, not by a drastic amount, but I'm seeing like around a negative 0.7 correlation. So it's a pretty negligible factor there. And again, we have to remember that a lot of these previous games that we're looking at for White and Murray together was also with DeMar DeRozan and with LaMarcus Aldridge. So that could change going forward. White certainly stands out as a strong option. I just don't know if he has the ceiling of a guy like DeJounte Murray, and he is cheaper, so you don't need the same ceiling. But for me, I would prefer to go with the Murray side in this one. I just like the way that he does a little bit more of everything. White is kind of more of a scoring type, even though he got to 40 last game without necessarily scoring the ball all that much. But I still think that in the long run, Murray is the guy with the greater ceiling.
And then are you putting those two guys together in lineups? Like if they come up in an optimizer, is that something you're looking to avoid, or are you comfortable with doing it?
I don't know if I'm actively avoiding it. Like I'm not creating any rules to keep them away from each other, but I don't want to say that I'm actively doing it either. So yeah. I think that it's a situation where I don't see a huge advantage or disadvantage to stacking them.
Makes sense. Yeah. And that's kind of how I'm treating it. I'm not avoiding it, but it is coming up for me in some of these FanDuel lineups. And I'm kind of letting it fly. We'll see how it sorts out though, because there are other good plays at the position and the way the multi-position works. There certainly are good plays to mix and match here. So that's good with the flexibility. On the DK slate, we've got a few guys who are coming up with pretty low salaries with significant optimal lineup rates. Looking at the boards, a couple of them are on the Memphis Grizzlies. We've got DeAnthony Melton coming up. He's 3,800 shooting guard and point guard eligible, 30+% optimal lineup rate, but he's trickling into negative leverage. We've also got Desmond Bane, also negatively leveraged, only 3,300. He's a small forward only on the DK slate, so I guess I'm stealing him from that, but he's a shooting guard on the FanDuel slate. You're getting him with a little bit of positive leverage on FanDuel, but he costs 51 over there. To me, he's not really in play on the FanDuel slate, but he's definitely interesting on the DK slate. So we'll throw him into the mix here. As far as value plays, though, focusing on the guard spot, also Alex Caruso looks somewhat optimal on that board for only 3,400. Who else are you looking at in terms of the guard spot for value on the DK slate?
Yeah, I mean, as far as value plays go, I think that Caruso and Melton stand out as the two best. But yeah, you are going to have to deal with the ownership on them. I kind of like Holiday if he ends up suiting up at 6,500. I know he's not necessarily a value, but 6,500 for Drew Holiday is about as cheap as you'll see for him. He's exceeded his expected scoring by about 6 DraftKings points with a comparable salary as a member of the Bucks. So I do think that that is somebody that we can go to that shouldn't be super chalky and will help us save a little bit of salary.
I like that call. So looking through that, we've got, looking at the value plays on the board, it very quickly turns into like a mid-range for me as I'm looking through this optimal lineup rate. Like I don't like to jump at the same position from if I'm looking down the board from the guys we just talked about to the next guy in that like 3K range or even the fours. If you're looking maybe, Gary Trent at 48, but you're already below 10% of an optimal lineup rate where we've got some guys that are in the 30s, the mid 20s on the board. I just don't like cutting that much of my optimal out. Is there anybody else like down the board, or are we immediately just kind of jumping into the mid range? Like, do you like any of the, let's say Gary Trent of the world, maybe throw Jeremy Lamb into that mix, maybe throw like Terrence Mann into that blender, Jalen Brunson, Grayson Allen, any of those type guys? Or you kind of cut off the value guys pretty high up and then just get into the mid-range?
It's tough. I mean, I don't see a guy that I feel very comfortable with in that 4K-ish price range, other than the chalky guys. I mean, you could talk yourself into Jalen Brunson, I suppose. He had a pretty good showing in that first night, and he's a pretty good contributor on a per minute basis. But I personally find myself gravitating towards more of a mid-range build tonight. I just see a lot of value in these mid-range guys, and that's sort of where I'm focusing the majority of my attention. Stars and Scrubs, it's a great build, I feel like most nights, but to start the year here, it feels like a lot of my attention has been to these guys that are between 5,500 and like 8K.
Yeah, and that's how things are coming up for me as well. I ran a crunch on DK. I'm playing on FanDuel, and I'm getting quite a bit through the mid-range on both sites. So I kind of agree with you on that, and I like what you're saying there. Looking at those mid-range plays, we do have quite a few of them. We talked about a couple, like I would say, Murray at 7,100 on DK and 8,100 on FanDuel, certainly in that mid-range space. But we've got a bunch of other guys on the board that I think are at least worth discussing, like a Freddie Van Vliet. I think OG Anunoby is interesting, although he's forward again. It's a change of position. He's a forward on DK. He's a guard on FanDuel. I think he's a little bit interesting. He was coming up optimal. It looks like he gained a little bit of ownership, so he's less positively leveraged than when I wrote about him this afternoon. We've also got some stars on that level that we'll get into, but at the mid-range, Malcolm Brogdon is on that level, CJ McCollum, Devontae Graham, Nickeil Alexander-Walker. You mentioned Drew Holiday. Any of those guys out of that group of primarily shooting guards, and then I would throw like Chris Paul into the mix maybe for 8K and 7,500 at the point guard spot. Kind of talking about a guy who in your mind is a star, but he's priced like a mid-range guy on this slate.
Yeah, I think again this is the sweet spot here. I love the Toronto guys like Van Vliet and OG Anunoby have just shot the ball dreadfully to start the year. Right, they're going to get you would think they'll get some positive regression at some point. And when they do, it seems like they are going to be able to beat these price tags by a pretty significant amount. So I like them quite a bit. I also think you can go back to Lonzo after his triple-double yesterday. Still pretty reasonably priced. He's 6,800 on DraftKings. I think he's an elite value at 6,200 on FanDuel. Against the Detroit Pistons, who are going to be a pretty bad team this year. I don't think that's a hot take. I think that those guys all make a ton of sense. You could throw a D'Angelo Russell in there. The Timberwolves have the top implied team total on the slate the last time that I checked, taking on a Pelicans team that we know plays no defense. He was really involved in the Timberwolves' first game this year. Usage rate nearly 37%. He just only ended up playing like 25 minutes because they won that game pretty convincingly. So, yeah, I think there are a ton of like interesting guards in this price range.
Yeah, for sure. And you mentioned the shooting by Van Vliet and by Anunoby. I noted that in my column this afternoon. I found it funny that he went from 19.3. Anunoby went from 19.3% usage as a 0.93 fantasy point per minute player last season up to 25.1% usage, and he dropped to a 0.79 fantasy point per minute over 2 games so far this year. So I think we can expect more. I know he's kind of a guy that people don't seem to like to play all that much, or maybe I'm reading that wrong, but that's been my perception. And I think it's a mistake on this slate. I think he's got value there. Looking through that tier, I agree with you on some of those guys. Let's see, Middleton. Did you talk about Middleton in there? Because he's a guy
Didn't touch on Middleton yet.
Yeah, talk to me a little bit about Chris Middleton, another guy who's a forward, small forward on the DK slate. Actually, you know what? We'll save him for the forward conversation. I think he's a little bit more relevant there. Let's jump up to the stars at the guard spot before we move on. Looking at some of the board on the guards, we've got Dame Lillard down board a little bit in terms of how frequently he's coming up optimal on the DK slate. Tough matchup against Phoenix there for him. Up the board a little bit. We talked CJ McCollum there. We've got Luka, obviously, as the big name star at the top of the board, coming up as one of the most frequently optimal plays on the DK slate. Same story on the FanDuel slate. Positively leveraged more so on FanDuel. Big price tag, but is Luka somebody that you're really looking to spend up for on this slate?
Yeah, I think in tournaments, he's somebody that you want to be overweight on, right? Like there are only so many opportunities to grab Luka as a positively leveraged play, as a guy who might be a little bit overlooked by the rest of the field. And tonight seems like one of those spots, right? There are some legitimate concerns about the Dallas offense with Jason Kidd as head coach. He's kind of installed this like mid-range shooting machine in their first game, and it was not good. It was a really ugly sight. But we know Doncic is a great player, right? One of the best per minute fantasy players in the league, up there with the James Hardens and the Luke and the Giannis's of the world. So if I can get him at, sub 20% ownership, which is what we're looking at right now in our boom bust tool, he's checking in around 18%. I think that's something you have to be interested in.
Yeah, for sure. Luka's somebody that basically on any slate, anytime I have the opportunity to get him, especially when I can get it with positive leverage, but pretty much all the time, if I can afford to put Luka Doncic in my last spot as I'm building a lineup, I am happy to do it. So that's definitely a star that I'm looking to. And then Paul George playing without Kawhi, taking a whole big burden on his shoulders out there. 28.9% usage right now, a 1.46 fantasy point per minute guy, averaging 36.5 minutes over the first game. Gave us 36.5 minutes in the first game, I should say. We've got him pegged for 34.9 minutes, figured around the same kind of run tonight. Do you expect a lot out of Paul George in this spot? A guy you can swap between the small shooting guard and the small forward position on FanDuel. And I know small forward on the DK slate, so I'm stealing him again.
Yeah, Paul George, great player, right? Going to have more opportunities to create some scoring now that Kawhi Leonard is sidelined. I do think he might be a smidge pricey for me, compared to a guy like Doncic, who I can get for, we're talking only a couple hundred more on these sites here. So I think George is a fine play, but he's not somebody that I find myself getting to very often today.
Yeah, and he was somebody that when I was looking at my crunch on the last one, and I'm having a little issue with my sorting tool here, which is a problem, but we'll figure it out. He was coming up. He wasn't coming up that much. I gave him a couple of thumbs to get him into one of the crunches that I ran. So I've got some of them in my sorting tool, but he's the star that I think if I'm going to have somebody go by the wayside, it might be him because I like a few of the bigs. Somebody who is on my board and isn't really coming up as much in the sites numbers on the boom bust tool and is pulling negative leverage across both sites. Not a great optimal rate, but he's a star level player in my mind and kind of priced in that mid-range, but I missed him before and somebody super chatted about him. So we appreciate the super chat out there. That's Zach LaVine. They were asking if LaVine is an interesting pivot for you for 8,600 on the DK slate. I'll throw it out there as well on the FanDuel slate where you can get him at point guard and shooting guard.
Yeah, I'm like the president of the Zach LaVine fan club. I think that the season that he had last year went so unappreciated by most people, right? To do the volume of scoring that he put up averaging over 27 points per game and shoot over 50% from the field and 40% from the free throw line. Like, he is super efficient. And we have not seen the additions that the Bulls made in the offseason really cut into his workload at all to start the year. So I think LaVine for sure has excellent upside. Does he have the upside of a Luka or a Paul George? Probably not. But as a slightly cheaper player, I do think he's someone that you can consider for sure.
Yeah, he was one of the guys I clicked on just when I was hand building a lineup. I like to go through after I write my column, and I've got a lot of the optimal stuff and all that in my head. I like to go through and hand build my first lineup or two. And he was a guy that I was looking at and just I love the ability to swap them around. So I was just rotating a bunch of the guards that are in that price range around on FanDuel, and you can get to a bunch of different interesting configurations. So I really like doing that. And he was definitely a part of my plans, and he's in my player pool here. So guys, before we move on to talk about some of the forwards on the board, I want to talk about the start of the NBA season. We've got a special tip-off deal which grants all new Awesemo Plus members 50% off their first week of Awesemo Plus Platinum. Use the promo code Curry, CURRY, just like Steph, at our checkout on our link in the video description below. This was written clunkily when I interject my own sentences here. This includes access to all the premium tools and content on Awesemo.com for every sport. Guys, it includes everything that we have at the site, all right? I'm not going to sit here and read this to you. I know about Platinum plans. You guys should know about Platinum plans. It's the best value we've got on the site. Projections, ownership, tools like the boom bust every single day, not just when it's free. Tools like top stacks for NFL tomorrow. All the content that you guys need to go from guessing to winning. Stop guessing, start winning. Awesemo Plus. Jump in there. Promo code Curry gets you your first 50% off your first week of the weekly. We're brought to you by PrizePicks. We've got a few minutes before we get into them, so let's hop over and talk about some of the forwards. And I'm going to kind of lob it over to you, Matt, to just give me a little bit of an overview blanket on some of these forwards while I try and figure out what's going on with my sorting tool here. So taking into account power forward and small forward, what are you seeing as far as the best overall plays on the slate? And then we'll get into like tier by tier specific guys.
Yeah. So as usual, the first question you kind of have to ask yourself is, are we going to pay up for Giannis at forward? Normally a pretty good option if you can do it. Coming off of a disaster game last time out where the Bucks just got absolutely smoked by the Heat. Giannis only ended up playing like 23 minutes or so. But so far this season, Giannis has been better, right? He's been a better fantasy asset than he was last year, which is scary. He's up over 1.9 DraftKings points per minute through his first two games. He looks, I don't want to say better, but certainly more confident at the free throw line. So if we're going to add a few extra points per game in from a free throw perspective, like this guy, the sky is just the limit for him. He's showing up favorably, more higher optimal rate than any other forward on DraftKings, pretty close to it on FanDuel as well. So I think he's somebody you want, right? Like he's somebody that you want to have in your lineups for sure. It's just a question of how much do you play. I want to be overweight on the field for sure. Like that's kind of my stance here as far as how to approach Giannis. It's just, he's just too good. He's too good. And 2,500 is too cheap for him on DraftKings.
I think that's what most of the rest of the NBA would tell you about Giannis as well. And if you're talking about him improving any aspect of his game, that's just kind of scary when you think about the impact that he's already had on the league. So yeah, I'm right there with you. One of my favorite pay up options on the slate as well on either site. Definitely looking to have more than the field of Giannis. He's coming up. We're nitpicking if we're saying he's coming up at negative leverage. He's basically efficiently owned on the FanDuel slate, which means I'm happy to press the gas pedal down a little bit and get to more shares of him over there and get overweight to the field when he's coming up so frequently optimal. And then on the DK slate, you not only get him as one of the most optimal forwards, he's also sitting there with center eligibility at positive leverage. So that's just a smash spot in terms of a pay up option for me. As far as the rest of the forwards, it looks like, we're mostly dealing with guys in the mid range. We do have Paul George eligible at forward, but we already talked about him. He's 10-2 on the FanDuel slate. He's 9,800 on the DK slate. That's kind of what's keeping him off the board for me. And then looking through some of the other higher priced guys, we've got Domantas Sabonis at 9,600 on the FanDuel slate and 10,000 on the DK slate. Are you getting that much of him, or was Giannis just kind of blocking those shares for you, or are you trying to force in some Sabonis?
Yeah, I do think Giannis is kind of blocking him at the moment, but that could end up making him a great GPP play tonight, right? Like we have him as positively leveraged on DraftKings, less than 7% ownership on the boom bust tool. And we know this guy's ceiling is outstanding. He's displayed some more 3-point shooting ability this year. So that would be another nice wrinkle that he's added to his game potentially. He's maybe the closest facsimile to Nikola Jokic in the league. I know that's blasphemy, but he's pretty close. He's pretty close. He's like a slightly discounted diet version of Nikola Jokic. So again, anytime you can get a player like that when the rest of the field seems to be overlooking him, you should probably consider it. You know, after sitting here and talking it out and thinking about it, I probably need to go get some Domantas Sabonis in my lineups.
Yeah, and that was the decision I made before we started the show. When I was crunching some lineups, I noticed that he wasn't coming up quite as much. And I just kind of like to look through my lineups as they're crunching, not necessarily for, all right, am I getting to the right optimal plays? Because I trust my setup, the process, and the optimizer to get me to those lineups. But I do like to look for when certain stars are missing, right? Just guys that are capable of going out and giving me 70 FanDuel points on any given night, regardless of opponent or situation. And I do lump him into that group. So he was a guy that I noticed for that and kind of started pushing up as well. Just looking back over to our Discord channels, I'm sitting in the breaking news channel, guys. If you're asking me questions in the basketball channel, I haven't spotted them, but I'll try and get in there and catch up. But we do have some breaking news. Kyle Lowry, as anticipated, is out for the Heat tonight. So why don't we start there? No other major news. Drew Holiday and Hood are in for the Bucks. Jeremy Lamb, Justin Holiday, and Torrey Craig, who are all questionable for the Pacers, are also in. Campaign out, but we knew that already. Gabe Vincent starting for the Heat tonight. So we've got the starting lineup for the Heat: Gabe Vincent, Jimmy Butler, Duncan Robinson, PJ Tucker, and Bam Adebayo. Talk to me about the Heat with Vincent going into the lineup. Does that change your thoughts about Tyler Herro that we were talking about earlier, or Tyler Herro?
Nope. I still like Tyler Herro quite a bit. Don't care if he comes off the bench or starts. Coming off the bench might actually be better for him because we can get him, you know, he can serve as sort of the captain of the second unit. 43 DraftKings points in 24.2 minutes on opening night. Probably not looking at that kind of production again on a per minute basis, but certainly he could see more playing time than he did in that game. And like, if you just look at his preseason numbers, this seems like it might be the Tyler Herro bounce back year. He broke out in the playoffs, 19-year-old rookie, kind of a disappointing year in his sophomore season. I think we're getting good Tyler Herro based on everything we've seen so far this year, be it the preseason and the first game of the year. He's 1.38 DraftKings points per minute over that entire, the past month or so. So I really like him. He's 5,500 on DraftKings and FanDuel. I think he's an excellent play on this slate. I'll be interested to see what our projections look like for Vincent once those get updated, because we were talking about how it's hard to find a value guard outside of the chalk plays. Maybe Vincent enters that conversation. He wasn't great on a per minute basis last year. He was at about 3/4 of a DraftKings point per minute. But he's somebody, if you think that maybe he can get 20 plus minutes, maybe he becomes an interesting option. And then, of course, Bam and Jimmy Butler both probably get slight bumps as well. So, the Heat become an interesting team. They already kind of were to me, but now they're a team that I think becomes a priority target, especially when you consider how poor the Pacers have looked on the defensive side of the ball this year.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's, I think, with just the minutes allocation that they've gotten with a few games early on in the season here, too, it's, potentially an argument that they're a little bit worn down. They got a few guys playing with some nagging injuries. So, yeah, good spot to target. I think I was getting to some of those guys on the Heat earlier, and I expect that now we'll definitely be getting to at least some Tyler Herro in the next version of this crunch here in this sort, which I'm still struggling to figure out. But I am dropping our update in here. Not sure if it was updated just for this news that we're talking about now, but we'll find out in a second when I sort this, and we'll see what happened with Tyler Herro. This might not have caught it yet. Looks like we haven't quite caught that last update yet. So we talked through the Heat situation. Let's jump back over, talk about some more of these different forwards on the board. Guy who's coming up a ton for value on the DK slate, And it's actually, it's a mixed up one on the board again, because he's a small forward on the FanDuel slate and he's 5,500. Comes up a little bit relevant over there, but really, really relevant. And we didn't talk about him very much in the guard conversation, so we'll go back to him on the DK slate. Chris Duarte from that Indiana team, 3,900 on DK, 5,500 on FanDuel. Talk to me about him across those sites, knowing that he's a small forward on one and a shooting guard on the other.
Yeah, I mean, the guy can clearly play, right? I think he was the oldest player ever drafted in the lottery, 24-year-old rookie. So the fact that he even went in the lottery was a bit surprising to some people, but the guy can shoot it. He's getting opportunities with the Pacers. I do think that they're going to have some of their value players back in. Justin Holiday is in tonight. Jeremy Lamb is in. Torrey Craig is in, but still no Karis LeVert, still no TJ Warren. So Duarte is going to have a role. I do worry a little bit about the ownership for him, right? We have him projected as one of the highest owned players on the slate on DraftKings, nearly 36%. He has upside, obviously, at 3,900, right? He's blown up his price tag the past 2 starts, but he did need overtime. He played a ton of minutes in that second game. I think that there's merit to fading him with the amount of ownership that he's expected to catch.
That's all right. That's an interesting call. Is there somebody on the board at that price then on the DK slate specifically where he's pushing 36% ownership right now, right in line with the amount that we're finding him optimal? Is there somebody that you like at that like 3,900 or below, or like slightly above 4,000 kind of price range that you're swapping to, that you're pivoting to instead of him?
Yeah, I mean, he's not going to be any less as far as ownership goes, but I do think Melton at 3,900 or 3,800 is a better play. Melton, okay. We have a long track record on this guy of being a DraftKings point per minute type of guy. And he started on opening night. He played over 30 minutes. I feel very comfortable with him at 3,800 that he can get us back into that 30 DraftKings point type range. Duarte can probably do that too, but I just feel a little bit better about Melton doing it.
All right, you heard it here first. That's the way to go between those two incredibly chalky value plays. I like it. So before we move on, talk about some of the other forwards, and then we'll get into the rest of the slate. Let's talk about PrizePicks real quick. PrizePicks, first off, they're now live in the state of Maryland. So people in Maryland, pay attention. You got a new site to play on. It's a daily prop-based contest. So it's not like a lot of the other sites that you see where you have to worry about ownership and optimizers and mass entries and guys like, Alex throwing in 150 entries and knowing way more than you do and using the best tools in the business. You don't have to worry about that stuff. PrizePicks, you are picking prop-based picks. You can use the tools that we have on the site to help you pick better prop-based picks. You put 5-player lineups together. It can net you up to 10x on your entry fee. Use your knowledge of multiple sports. You have multiple cross-sport entries. So you can pick some stuff from hockey and basketball and put those together. You can pick stuff from football and baseball and put those together. You can mash it all up together, guys. They cover basically every possible sport you can imagine. If you use promo code Awesemo, you get $100 match on your first deposit. $100 first match deposit bonus. Promo code Awesemo, probably all in caps. It's written here all in caps. Let's go all in caps on that one. Download it in the App Store or on Google Play or play on PrizePicks.com. Use the free player props tool on our site to help you make the best decisions. Once again, that's PrizePicks.com, guys. Go check them out. I think you're going to like it. They are live now in the state of Maryland. So everybody down in Baltimore, after you hear this, go jump on that site. All right, moving on. Let's talk about some of the value plays at the small forward and power forward here. Who do we like who do we have our eye on since Duarte's a guard on DK? Who do we have our eye on for the value range at either forward position? Are there any real standout extreme value plays? And then like jumping up to the guys, let's call it below 5,000 on the DK slate. What are you seeing there?
Yeah. I mean, Scotty Barnes is going to be popular. He's checking in as literally the highest owned player on the slate, I think, in the last run of projections that I saw. Again, I'm not a huge fan of that. We have him as pretty negatively leveraged with that much ownership. So I think fading him is definitely a reasonable take. Desmond Bane is a little bit closer to me for being in play, right? Like he's 3,300, and I was pretty shocked at how involved he was on opening night. Like, yeah, the minutes, I wasn't, the minutes weren't shocking, but a 29.2% usage rate, right? He was second on the team in that department. He scored 22 points. He was also pretty heavily involved in their offense during the preseason. So like, if he's going to become sort of that second option behind John Morant, I think being at 3,300 could end up being like a comical price tag at one point this year. So I think even though he is sort of similar to Barnes in that we have him projected for more ownership than his optimal percentage, right? He's grading out as a negative leverage play. I feel a little bit more comfortable using him in that spot at 3,300 than I do with Barnes at 4K.
Okay. All right. I like that. And then moving on from, and I'm with you on Barnes. I think he's probably just drawing too much focus there. And he's coming up in kind of a mid-range in terms of the amount that we're finding Barnes optimal on this slate. He's coming up a little bit more on the DK slate for being optimal. So I like him a little bit better over there, but he's still, I think, negatively leveraged to a degree that I don't really need him. I'll take some shares of him for sure. I'm not saying cross him off, but it's definitely, a spot where I probably look to go under the field. Definitely a spot where I'd probably look. That was well said. We got a super chat from a Y and a bunch of Z's with a 7 in there. It's a name I'm not going to be able to say, but we appreciate the $5. And they want to know, do you prefer Tyler Harrow or Melton on FanDuel?
I would say Tyler Hero. I mean, I like Melton again. I think I've made my position on Melton pretty clear. But the difference in price tag is not nearly as severe on FanDuel as it is on DraftKings. So if all things being equal, I'll take Hero. I think that Melton more, it's just the value that he presents on DraftKings that is drawing me to him.
All right. And now it's another spot now where we've got just a whole mess of guys kind of living in this mid-range. Some of them projecting out better than others in terms of our optimal rate, in terms of our boom score probability. So within that range of guys, in the below 9, above 5, where we've got quite a few guys. We talked about OG Anunoby, but, we could talk about Brandon Ingram in here. We've got Jaren Jackson Jr. at what I think is too low a price at 62 on the DK slate. I'm still interested at 71 on the FanDuel slate, but I think he's a downright bargain on DK. Keldon Johnson, probably too cheap as well at 4,900. Who are we liking on out of this mid-range and, dip down into the sub 5K range if there's anybody you still like on that board as well?
Yeah, definitely. Keldon Johnson deserves some love here. He was very good for the Spurs in their last game. He kind of fits the same description as DeJounte Murray and Derek White, right? Where he's going to have to be one of their focal points offensively this season. And, Murray and White have been priced up and Johnson has been priced up a bit on FanDuel, but 4,900 for him on DraftKings is just simply too cheap. So I think that's a really strong price tag for him. Certainly OG Anunoby. Again, we did kind of touch on him earlier, but like he's just not getting enough attention tonight. I think that his upside is vastly higher than what the rest of the field is kind of using him at. So I like him quite a bit at the forward spot. Brandon Ingram, can't go wrong with Brandon Ingram. I think, for the Pelicans without Zion, he was 1.25 DraftKings points per minute with Zion off the court last year. So I think those guys, plus you want to throw Jimmy Butler in the mix, like that's kind of where I think most of my forward exposure is tonight.
And then there's a guy who's coming up pretty differently across sites. He's still in play on the DK slate where he's 7,300, a power forward only, coming up a decent amount of optimal, but there's a lot of guys at forward ahead of him. A little bit of positive leverage, but on the FanDuel slate, pretty significantly optimal, but he's coming up a little bit negatively leveraged. For me, he's kind of a foundational play, especially because he can move between power forward and center, and he only costs 6,800. That's Kristaps Porzingis here. I really like the Porzingis play, and I'm willing to push past the field's ownership on this slate. And he was coming up quite a bit for me in the optimizer when I was running crunches earlier. Are you getting to Porzingis on the FanDuel slate? And what do you think of him on the DK slate?
Yeah, I think he's very much in play on FanDuel for me at 6,800. He looked great during the preseason. He seems healthy again, right? He was blocking shots. He was knocking down some shots from the perimeter. I think we just have to throw out basically everything that we saw from that Dallas offense on night one. If that's how they're going to play all year, then yeah, Porzingis might not be a great fantasy option, but the track record is too long of these guys being successful DFS plays to just go off that one result. So I do think I agree with you. Kristaps is a really nice value at just 6,800, especially with the multi-positional eligibility. 7,300 on DraftKings. I can get behind him there too, but I don't think he's quite as optimal. Like I'd rather save the 1,000 with OG. Potentially look at somebody like Jeremy Grant even. At 6,700, I think he could be a bit overlooked tonight for the Pistons. So it's a little bit more crowded, that price range on DraftKings, but on FanDuel for sure, Porzingis is a strong play.
Yeah, Grant's an interesting one, actually. That's it was somebody who wasn't really on my radar, but I'm spotting him here now that you mention him, kind of sitting in the middle of that board at a price where is 7,400. Not a lot of people are going to have their eye drawn to that price on FanDuel. 6,700, a little bit better on DK, but again, not really like an eye-popping price. But he's coming up pretty positively leveraged on both sites. He's a guy that we saw get a boatload of usage and be like their focus player last year. He was at 27.8% usage last season, put up 1.04 fantasy points per minute. This season, a little bit of an uptick, 28.8% usage in that first game, 32.4 minutes on the floor, and gave us 1.23 fantasy points per minute there. So if he's getting that kind of usage, a little bit more focus in that offense after what he got last year and delivered on it, I'm happy to go back there from the mid-range. So I think that's an interesting call. I like that one a lot, and I'm going to try and squeeze him in here if I can get any lineups whatsoever to sort. I'm not really sure what's going on. Guy who was popping up a little bit for me from the value range was Jordan Nwora, 4,100 small forward, power forward on the DK slate, 4,400 power forward, small forward on the FanDuel slate. He was coming up for you. Did you mention him earlier when you were talking through some of the Bucks? I thought I heard him, but I wasn't sure.
Yeah, I like Nwora. I think Nwora is pretty legit offensively. He regressed a bit in that second game, and the Bucks are going to have a few more options available off the bench. I think Rodney Hood, we got news he was cleared, right? So like they're going to have a few additional options, but I think for sure he has solidified his spot in this rotation. And the Bucks still are without Brook Lopez. They're still without Bobby Portis. They're still without Semi Ojeleye. So they have spots in the front court available. I think that Nwora is just a good player, right? He was over 1 DraftKings points per minute as a rookie. And now he's just finally getting the opportunity to play more minutes. So I think for sure, go right back to the well with him. I have no issues with that.
Love it. Love it. So we've got about 15 minutes left here, guys. Got a couple new channels up on YouTube. We'd love it if you guys check them out. You guys are awesome on hanging out here with us. We've got over 60,000, I think, subscribers now overall to the channel. We love how everybody hangs out and supports us, but we need you to do that again and then do it one more time, because we've got a season-long fantasy football channel up now. It's totally separate from this one on YouTube. And we've also got a sports betting one. It's Awesemo Odds, Awesemo Football. I think you guys are going to love it. We've got around-the-clock content just going up all the time, finding the best possible bets, giving you the best advice for your fantasy football lineups for season long. So everything that you love about Awesemo spread across 2 more channels now. We're just looking to basically be like cable news, where we're just on, but we're talking sports and we're talking fun stuff, and we're having a good time. Instead of bringing you down, we're going to bring you up, and we're going to be there 24/7 for you. So check out those channels. Make sure you subscribe over there, and you'll get all the notifications. Stay up to date with everything that we're doing. Hit the like button here, hit the subscribe button here if you haven't already done that. We appreciate it. And let's take a look, Matt, at we'll hop over to some of the centers. A couple of these guys on the FanDuel slate have already been talked about with the multi-position eligibility. I don't think we had any crossovers on the DK slate, but we might have. But one guy that's coming up just ridiculously optimal again for me, and I say again because I've just gotten him each of the first 2 games that they played. I expect until his price changes, we're just going to keep on getting him, or until Zion Williamson comes back. But that's Jonas Valanciunas, 6,300 on FanDuel, 7,200 on DK. Just ridiculously optimal in our numbers here, more so on FanDuel, and he's getting a little bit of negative leverage. But what do you think of the J-Val play here?
Yeah, I mean, he's had 2 similar fantasy scoring games, right? 29-9 and then 35-1 on FanDuel. But the way he's gone about them have been wildly different, right? Game 1, 30.8% usage rate, couldn't buy a bucket. He was 3 for 19. And we're talking about a guy who was like 60% from the field last year. So he just couldn't hit water if he fell out of a boat. Then in game 2, his usage rate is nearly cut in half, but he shoots 8 for 11 from the field. So eventually he's going to put those two things together. He's going to put together the efficiency and the volume. And when he does, we're talking, 50 plus fantasy points very easily. The only thing that has stopped this guy in the past has been a lack of playing time. And that's not an issue right now with the Pelicans. He's going to play, 30 plus minutes. So yeah, I have tons of Valanciunas. I don't know how you can not have him at 6,300 on FanDuel. He's just standing out as such the best play on that site. It's almost impossible to fade him.
Yeah, I've been by habit just running some crunches with no randomness, no anything, just trying to get a pool of what the most overall optimal lineups are on FanDuel. And then I build in a bunch of randomized lineups and a whole bunch of other stuff in my process into that pool. But when I was doing that, and then when I switched over to the random lineups with both different sets, I was getting so much Jonas Valanciunas as I was running through that lineup that I had to keep stopping the crunch, taking him out of the player pool, and then just putting other centers into that spot just so I could get different configurations of lineups. But by far, in what I put into my sorting tool here, the preponderance of lineups is going to have Jonas Valanciunas at the center spot. And based on the way that I'm going to be able to sort this tonight, if I'm not 100% Jonas Valanciunas, I'm going to be very surprised because I have no control over what's going on in this sort today. I don't know what's going on, but it's going to be a fun set of lineups that we're popping into the old FanDuel here today. So good luck to me. But looking at the board outside of Valanciunas, if you do go away from him on FanDuel, and I honestly, if I end up 100% on him, like I'm leaving maybe shares of Zubac on the table. I'm leaving shares of, Karl Anthony Towns for sure on the table if I do that. Maybe a little bit of Nikola Vukovic. I wasn't really getting DeAndre Ayton, Steven Adams, guys like that. So I'm thinking in terms of just like the center only plays and where that's going to cost me. So I do get a lot of these guys. You can get them at power forward, and that's where some of them were coming up, like the Porzingises of the world, Bam Adebayo, Jaren Jackson Jr., who we've already talked through with those guys. But am I making a mistake if I just leave Karl Anthony Towns on the table here? I feel like I am. And then same question as far as like Vukovic or anybody else on the board for you. If I'm just getting so much J-Val at the center spot on FanDuel, is that a major mistake if I leave Karl Anthony Towns on the table here?
Yeah, I think you want to force in some Towns, right? We know that this guy it can be a slate breaker at times. And the good news is you don't have to jam in that much to be significantly overweight on the field. Right, we have him projected for about 2% ownership on FanDuel, where he's 11K. That price tag is pretty prohibitive. He's nearly double J-Val. So he's not going to catch much ownership. If you jam in like 10, 15%, I think that should be sufficient to get the job done. Valanciunas, right? That's the question, is how much over the weight on the field do you want to be with him? Because that sort of determines how much exposure you're going to have to the other guys. If you want 50% Valanciunas, that gives you flexibility to get in the Vucevic's, the Towns, and all the other guys that you might want to consider at the center spot. If you want to go 75% Valanciunas, then it becomes a little bit more difficult to sort of cover all your bases. So my initial feeling is I would rather have the weight on Valanciunas. I'd like to be, closer to 70, 75% on Valanciunas, which is aggressive, but I think the price tag warrants it on this slate.
Yeah, I'm with you. And it looks like I am going to luck out and get at least some shares of Zubac in here. I see a couple shares of Towns, probably not enough. But the way that this thing is broken is going to require me to pay some attention to it while I'm not on a show. So I'm going to be rolling the dice with Valanciunas. And honestly, I'm somewhat comfortable with it. I don't mind going up to massive shares of a player who looks that frequently optimal. And that's one of those spots where we talk about it's just good chalk. It's not something to be avoided necessarily, even with negative leverage. If you blast well beyond the field on good chalk like that, you can make the same things happen with your lineup. So I'm popping those in there now. We'll look around for some questions and we'll talk about some of these other centers. Outside of Towns as a star there, who are you trying to get to when you're not getting to Valanciunas outside of just for the entire group on centers on DraftKings?
Jakob Poeltl is not bad. I mean, he is showing up as a negative leverage play, which isn't ideal. But again, he's a solid per minute contributor. He's going to play more for the Spurs this season after some of their losses. Zubac is grading out with a nice leverage score. You kind of touched on him. He's like a better play on FanDuel. He's a little bit cheaper there, but Zubac has nice leverage on FanDuel in the boom bust tool. Giannis, certainly, feel free to use him at center if you need to. And then Sabonis, I think, is the other guy that we've touched on that really deserves some consideration as a pay up at center.
Yeah, for sure. I love getting to some Sabonis here, like we talked about. And I really like the fact that I can get him at power forward or center here. I'm getting him much more at power forward just because of how much Valanciunas was coming up. And then in terms of guys like Karl-Anthony Towns, I think it's just additionally going back to that thought about him being kind of an anti-optimizer play. I think even when lineups don't include Valanciunas, particularly on FanDuel, the way these guys are priced, I was getting so many configurations where just one of the main power forwards from Sabonis, Porzingis, Bam Adebayo, and some of these other guys, and Jaren Jackson, those guys were rotating into the center spot with another two of those guys at power forward more frequently than I was getting to Karl-Anthony Towns. So I really do agree with you what you were saying there, just as a contrarian pay up play. Anytime you can get to a spectacular player like that with positive leverage, with just low overall aggregate ownership, 2% ownership on the FanDuel slate, 12-ish on the DK slate, I think it makes a ton of sense to start doing that. So, as far as centers go, those are kind of going to be where I'd like to be focused. We'll see where I'm actually focused. But we got a couple questions in from Super Chats. Zach Williams gave us $6.99 in loonies, which are Canadian dollars. They've got geese on them, as far as I know. I think they replaced the queen with geese. You guys can correct me about that. The Canadians can correct me if I'm wrong about that. But he's asking a 2v2 DK question for cash. We haven't talked much cash, but are you thinking Jackson Jr. and Valanciunas, or Butler and Keldon Johnson for a 2v2 DK cash?
I would probably lean towards the Keldon Johnson side.
Jimmy Butler and Keldon Johnson. Okay, so despite the enthusiasm for Valanciunas, we're going that way. I think I agree. I was getting to some Jaren Jackson, but I think it's probably more valuable to go up because I think you can get that game out of Keldon Johnson, and I think there's a better chance that you're getting the big game out of Jimmy Butler outside of the point for the tournament appeal of Valanciunas there. And then another question we had, Darren Anderson gave us $1.99, asks thoughts on Michael Bridges sub 5K DK GPP play.
He was somebody that I saw as a leverage option here when I was going through some of these, going through the boom bust tool. Let's see. Yeah, he's popping in the optimal like 8% of the time. That's not bad at 10% ownership. He's not somebody that I had really given a ton of thought to. The Blazers, they are favored in that matchup, but we know the Blazers, they can play. They were 29th in defensive efficiency last year. So maybe I should get some more Phoenix. I mean, we're running out of time. It's not going to happen, but Phoenix is a team that we really didn't talk much about. And they do have a pretty decent matchup now that you think about it. So Bridges, my answer is maybe. How's that?
Well, they had that going into their question that they paid for, but yeah, I think I agree with you though. It's coming up as a firm maybe for me as well. He's just kind of in that range where he's a meh play on FanDuel at 5,700, both forward spots. Looks a little bit better on DK for 4,900, where you can get him at both guard and forward. And I like those guys on DK because you can get them guard, forward, guard, both of the positional guard and forwards, then the singular like forward spot, guard spot, or the util spot. So you can move them around the board a lot when you get positioning like that. I do like that aspect of them, but let's talk real quick about Phoenix since we didn't really talk them through that much. Looking at the board, they're not standouts in terms of our optimal rates, but we do certainly have some good raw point scoring ability on this team. And that's reflected in at least the 3 stars in Chris Paul, Devin Booker, DeAndre Ayton. Is there one of those 3 guys that you're looking to go to? For me, it's a little bit of it. I think Devin Booker, just maybe thinking in terms of Chris Paul, maybe winding back a couple games in just a few nights here for them. So is that something you're thinking about? Or are you kind of looking to smash Chris Paul? Is it DeAndre Ayton? Who you like out of those guys?
Yeah, none of them is really popping, like you said. I would give the edge to Devin Booker. I'm with you, Chris Paul, right? His focus and the team's focus should be keeping him healthy for the postseason. I don't think there's a huge need to push him this early in the season. So I would expect Booker to be the guy that does most of the heavy lifting for the team until the more important games come around. So he would be the way that I would approach Phoenix on this slate. But yeah, I don't know. Like I want to be more in on Phoenix than I am. You know what I'm saying? I want to like them more because they're a good team and they have a good matchup, but just nobody really stands out at their current price tags.
Yeah, and I think they're a team, they did that to me a lot last year where like they don't necessarily pop for their medium projections, but when they get one of these open games, they can certainly run with a lot of teams. They can definitely score with a lot of teams. It's just they don't project out that way with like gigantic upside. And I think those guys cannibalize one another's projections a little bit, so they don't really pop in a lot of models. But then a lot of times you find that, hey, wow, I really wish I had Devin Booker tonight. So thinking in terms of that, is there anybody else that you're maybe underweight to that you're kind of thinking, oh man, that one might burn me? Or conversely, is there anybody that you're overweight to that you're thinking, oh boy, I'm really worried about that one. That one might burn me. Who's the problems tonight for you?
Lillard is somebody that I have like none of, and he could certainly burn me for sure. I'm going to be under, I would think, on Paul George as well. So I'm a little bit worried about him. As for somebody that I'm overweight on, it's D'Angelo Russell. Like he's kind of a player that I am taking a bit of a stand on here. He looked so good in that first game. We've seen him, have big games in the past. Last year was a bit of a lost year for him, but I think that Pelicans Timberwolves game is just like the best game of the day from a fantasy perspective. And Russell doesn't seem like he's getting the same attention as some of the other players in that matchup. So he's somebody that I expect to be way over the field on. And if he, has a clunker, it's not going to be a great night for me.
Okay, that's a bit of a curveball here at the end of the show. Mash in D'Angelo Russell in your last 10 seconds here, or whatever we got left before lock, guys. But hey, good news. I think I forgot to mention it throughout the show. We're actually sticking around for another half hour, kind of like what Greg and I did last night. We're going to be brought to you by Yahoo through that half hour. We're going to talk through a little bit of the Yahoo slate, take a look at where some of the pricing points diverged from what the other sites were doing, where you could potentially have capitalized. We'll go through some player prop bets as well, and then we'll maybe take a look at building a single game lineup if we've got one available. So we're going to jump over to that, but we appreciate everybody hanging out. Good luck tonight with your contests on DK and FanDuel. I think Matt did a killer job going through all of this stuff, and we've been talking fast. We appreciate it. Hit the like and subscribe button. If we can get this show up over 500 likes, if we're not there yet, let me see. We weren't before. 355. We're like the same level. What have you guys been doing? Everybody's been asleep out there. We're sticking around an extra half hour. We need to get to 500 likes here, boys. Orton's neckbeard in the Yahoo chat saying, do a shot for the boys. Yeah, I like that too. Hit the like button, then go do a shot. Come back here. We're going to be still talking about Yahoo. We're going to pop over to that slate now. I'm pulling it up here. I'll hit the schedule for tomorrow at the end of the overall show. So just jumping over to the Yahoo slate, we get a configuration. Sorry? Hold on. I got Jordan in my ear. For the extended show? No, I thought it was the main sponsor that changed to PrizePicks. I think this was brought to us by Yahoo. All right. I'm going to keep going and talking about this. If it's brought to us by PrizePicks, we're going to be talking about some player props in the middle of the show anyway. So apologies to our two wonderful sponsors who sponsor a lot of content on these shows. Gets a little confusing when we don't cross up the marketing schedule. But looking at the board for Yahoo, I'm just going to go through and kind of pick out some of these plays. I mean, we've got a lot of the stars that you would expect to see priced way up, right? Like Giannis is, I almost said Giannis. Woo! My brain is still in baseball and football. Giannis sitting at 55, Luka sitting at 52. Sabonis is priced way up, 50 for Sabonis. Putting Sabonis at a price range that's got him on par with Luka and just a couple bucks behind Giannis. Is that something to you where it would push you off of wanting to get to shares of Sabonis, like we were talking about wanting to get to him on the other sites because he was priced down compared to those guys, where he's priced up? I think this would take him off the board for me if I was building Yahoo lineups.
Yeah, it's just it's too close, right? I mean, I love Sabonis. I stan him. He's got the great upside, but like the ceiling game from Sabonis is the average game for a Giannis or a Luka Doncic. So it's hard when you're only saving a buck or two here and there to really consider him in those teams. I mean, he should probably have zero ownership, but yeah, I don't see the upside at that salary.
Yeah, same here. And if you're building for the later slates, we know that game started. I'm just looking at the main board because I think it's interesting to go through some of the plays and kind of just illustrate this is where you can gain advantage if you play on multiple sites. And if you consider it all one broad portfolio, if you were watching the morning show today with Emac and Steve, they were talking about it a little bit. If you look site to site, you can shop for the best prices on these players, kind of like what we talk about with Odd Shopper shopping for the best bets. You can do that with these same plays, site to site on DFS, and you play these guys where they're going to be the most optimal for you, and you don't sweat it as much. So a play like that, I would have considered basically off the board. It is PrizePicks. All right, so that's the reason that we started talking about Yahoo and things like that. And that's what you guys can gain by looking through the different sites. And we appreciate Yahoo. They sponsored yesterday's show, and we were extended for a half hour for them. We're going to switch over, and we're going to talk about some player props now. That gives us quite a bit of time to talk about player props on the board here. So what I'm going to do is jump over to Awesemo. And maybe Jordan can get ready on the screen and take us through Odd Shopper while we're talking about some of these things, because we've made a lot of changes to Odd Shopper, and it plays really well with what you need for PrizePicks and what you need for when you're making your sports betting. We've made that into basically the same experience like what you get when you go to Best Buy, right? You go to Best Buy's website and you say, all right, I want to buy a TV. I want to buy a color TV. I want to buy a plasma TV. I want it to be over 50 inches. And you're just making a couple check marks, right? Single clicks that filter everything down for you. And you're suddenly left with one perfect TV. That's what we're doing on Odd Shopper for you. It's a few quick clicks based on what kind of bet do you want to make? What team do you like? What player do you like? What are you looking for? Tell us a little bit about what you're looking for, and we're going to drill that right down to the perfect bets for you, and we'll give you the suite of bets. We put some of those together, and we bundle together some props, and we make some nice parlay bets for you in there. It's really, really cool. It's really interesting. And where it helps with a site like PrizePicks is you can go through and you can look. We give you the expected hit rate on the bet, so we give you the expected success rate. And we also give you the expected ROI for when you're making your bets. You put those tools together with Alex's projections, and it's just totally powerful. This is a tool that people who are playing on a site like PrizePicks do not have at their disposal otherwise. So the place to go for that is you can go to Odd Shopper. You can also hit up the site. If you go to the NBA menu and pull up the drop down, we've got the NBA player props betting tool. And this is what we provide to go hand in hand with what we do for PrizePicks. So that's what I like to pull up when I'm talking about this. When I look at the board, I sort by expected win rate on some of these. So I'm going to look through some of those. I'm going to throw them out. I don't have the PrizePicks exact values up in front of me here. So I'm going to go with the ones that are on our board here. And if you can get them at a slightly better price on PrizePicks, take it. If you get it at a slightly worse value on PrizePicks, maybe consider something else. Use your heads as we talk about these things, guys. We're going to illustrate how to use the tools in conjunction with our sponsor PrizePicks, and I think it'll work out pretty well. So looking at that board, the top overall play on the board in terms of expected win rate is one that is kind of an off-the-board play. It's Taurean Prince with a prop line of 8.5 points. And we've got it coming up 80% of the time successful as the under, because Alex has it at a 5.74 projection, and it's a 61% ROI on that bet. I'm going to skip down to something that's maybe more relevant. I'm going to talk Ja Morant. We've got Ja Morant. We're talking about the under with Ja as well on a 24.5 prop line. with a 47% ROI. We've got that one coming in 74% of the time on the under for Ja Morant and hitting 24.5 points. Do you like that one? Is that something that you would chase, Matt?
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. And the line is the same on PrizePicks. It's 24.5. So that's good to know. But yeah, it seems like the Grizzlies are going to have a little bit more of a balanced approach offensively. And not to say that Ja isn't still their guy, but when you have Desmond Bane posting a 30% usage rate, when you have DeAnthony Melton in the starting lineup, as opposed to a guy like Kyle Anderson, right? Like there are more offensive threats on the team this season that can take some of that responsibility away from Ja. So I do think that under 24.5 is a pretty good number there.
Yeah, that was one that definitely stands out on the board, and one of our highest expected win rate bets, and a pretty solid ROI at 47%. So I definitely like that one a lot if you're making bets. I think it works very, very well if you're making prize pick picks as well. You get up to 10x if you hit one of the 5 pick picks. So pretty solid payouts over there as well. Use that promo code Awesemo, get you up to the $100 on that first deposit bonus. Another one that I'm looking at on the points board to take an over one. Jaren Jackson Jr., a guy that came up a few times when we were talking DFS. He's got a pretty solid return on the over on his points line. The line is 16.5. We've got it coming up with a 70% win rate and a 30% ROI. Do you like that one?
Yeah, I do like Jaren Jackson. I think that he's a little bit of a lower usage type player. He can do a lot of things, which is why he's so great in fantasy, right? We love big men that can block shots and knock down 3-pointers. And Jackson certainly one of the best in the league at doing those two things. As far as like just raw scoring though, on a night to night basis, I do think that he has some volatility in that department. As a pivot, we've got OG Anunoby at 16.5 points on prize picks as well. I'd feel a little bit more comfortable with OG's over than with Jaren Jackson's, even though, as you mentioned, Jackson's prop is grading out a bit more favorably in the prop tool.
Yeah, that one, and OG's right there. If I'm looking down the board, it's only a few spots down the board, 66% likely as opposed to 70, 27% return on investment as opposed to 30. We're splitting hairs on that one. So yeah, I'm totally with you. If you want to make a pivot there from one that might actually be over-owned in Jaren Jackson or something that a lot of people are going to, and you just want to pick something different, you go with OG, and maybe you pick up a win where other people are booking a loss into their lineups there. So that's a sharp play to go about that. Looking across some of the other types of bets, let's get these ones sorted by expected win here. And that's upside down. So one of the bigger expected wins, nope, that's going to be, oh no, Drew is playing. So that's on the board. Alex likes the under for assists for Drew Holiday. It's at 6.5. Alex has it coming in under. What do you think of that one?
Yeah, I don't hate that. I mean, Drew is not your traditional point guard, right? He doesn't have the ball in his hands all the time. Giannis is going to be doing a lot of the handling for them. Drew is kind of out there to hunt his own shot, to knock down 3-pointers. So I think that's fair. I think that's a fair number. And certainly I am not going to argue against Mr. Alex Baker. If he has this as an 80% win rate prop, then certainly we're going to trust him on that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think everybody out there in the audience by this point is familiar with my standing rule of if I disagree with Alex, just agree with Alex in your lineups and just stick with that side because I'm probably wrong. He's the best player in the world for a reason. And that's why his name's on the site. So guys, if you got any questions as well out there, feel free to fire away with questions. We've got some games locked, but we've got a lot of late swapping possibilities. I'm keeping an eye on the news channel. The news guy does a killer job for us in all our different channels, in the Discord, as well as in YouTube and all over the place on Twitter. So he's doing a killer job. Follow him. And I'm keeping an eye on the news, see if anything pops up where we need to talk late swap. I haven't noticed anything really yet. So I'm going to take a peek around here and we'll see if we can find another prop that comes up. Jumping over to the rebounds one, a guard that we mentioned, but we didn't really talk about him a lot. Triple-double last night, Mr. Lonzo Ball. With the prop, let's do it this way. The prop line is at 5.5 rebounds. Which way do you like that one?
Yeah, I mean, we all know that Lonzo is a great rebounder for a guard, but this does seem a smidge high. Like especially on the second leg of a back-to-back, I don't know how much that matters for rebounding perspective, but you do think maybe the legs are a little bit more tired. I said tireder. That's not a word. More tired. So maybe we look at the under on Lonzo. I see that grading out pretty favorably in the prop tool. So, I think that makes some sense.
Yeah, I like that one. Look, it's going to be a tight one, right? Alex has it projected for 4.49 rebounds, and it's a 5.5 line. So he's got him basically a rebound under. We did just see him triple-double last night. I like that situation for him. I think it's going to be a spot where he's just able to flourish as kind of a traditional point guard, do his thing, grabbing some boards and distributing the ball. And then when he scores the basketball, it's a little bit of a bonus. We saw him pick up his three-point shooting last season. I was honestly hoping my Knicks were going to pick him up. I can't really complain about the Kemba move, but I do like the spot for Lonzo. So it's one where I don't know that I would chase that one because I think it's close enough, but Alex does like it. We've got a 71% win share on it, 48% ROI. So it's a pretty killer bet and definitely a good spot on the PrizePicks board. Just taking a peek for any questions in the premium Discord channels here. Our guy J187, he's got a 1-of-1 role in Discord. He is our only currently certified helpful Excel nerd role because he is in there. He probably answered so far since we moved over to Discord more questions in the DFS 101 channel than I have or than EMAC has. So we really appreciate that help, buddy. And that's what you get when you sign up at the site, guys. You don't only get us, you get a really positive, really helpful community. Guys like our boy J187 there, who he made his own video on how to build your own model for NFL in Excel, how to build a sorting table in Excel. He's a killer guy. And there's a bunch of people like that. So I really encourage everybody. We've got some cheap plans up on the site. We've got some deals going on. So get behind the paywall and check things out. Join the community. Check things out with our Discord channels. I'm confident once you get in there, you're not going to want to leave. So J187, we appreciate it. That was a long-winded way of saying he mentioned in the chat that he's 70% Joe Val, 63% Bam, 61% Derek White. And he says, don't let me down. Buddy, I'm with you on that one. Don't let me down either because I got a hell of a lot of those guys as well. What do you think of that combination of three players owned to that percentage? Is that something
I would say that I'm pretty similar with the exception being a little bit less Derek White and a little bit more of the other Spurs guys, the DeJountes and the Keldon Johnsons. I'm a little bit more spread out on the San Antonio side, but for sure, like the Bam J Val combo on FanDuel, I think was the nut lineup build, like in my opinion.
Yeah, that was one that I was seeing come up quite a bit. And I was getting to White as well. We talked about, the Dejounte Murray, Derek White combo. We talked about, one or the other. And I agree with you on the ancillary Spurs there as well. I want to get to a lot of them. So I like that spot. Looking in the YouTube chat, our boy Orton's Neckbeard asks if they get free streaming of my DVDs behind me. That's the beautiful thing about owning a big pile of DVDs. There's like 1,000 of them back there. All of them are in a tiny little box out in the other room as well. They're all digitized. They're all available for streaming. So these don't really come out of the pile all that often. They're here for show. But when I can't find something, it's handy to have them. Got some director's cuts and stuff back there.
Have you compared collections with Adam Kaufman yet?
We've talked about it. We've been on a show or two last season. We crossed paths, ships in the night on that one. But we definitely have to sit down and compare notes on what we've got and maybe do like an old baseball card, like got it, need it, got it, need it kind of thing. So taking a look. Why don't you anything that is really standing out to you instead of me calling them out? Anything really standing out to you in terms of PrizePicks and standout play over there that might not be reflected on the board I'm looking at here?
Yeah, we talked about Anunoby. Let's stick with the Raptors. I'm looking at some Freddie VanVleet exposure, and his 3-point prop right now is set at 2.5. That is a pretty high number, but I still think I like the over on that. The guy is out there to launch 3-pointers. He's not shy about it. He had 9 attempts in the first game of the year. He cut that back to 5 in the second. But his playing time, like the Celtics gave them no competition in that game. So I think Fred VanVleet is due for some positive shooting regression. I have plenty of him in DFS tonight, and I want some exposure in the prop market too. I think you can take a stand at 17.5 points, but I think I would rather look at the over 2.5 threes.
Oh, all right. I like that curveball. So I was looking at him on the points board, and yeah, Alex is with you. Alex has the over coming up, over 17.5 coming up, 62% likely, 22% ROI. So it's one of the lower ROIs among the most likely bets, but it's not like it's, very far down board, and it's a fairly safe one, I think. We don't have the threes tabulated on this tool that I'm looking at here, but that makes a lot of sense to me. If you're thinking he's going to score a lot of points, well, how does he get his points? So those threes are going to have to be going down in a pretty decent volume there. So I like that. Looking around, let's see. We had a couple other questions pop up. Reezer has all the BAM and he's loving it. Cool. Hopefully that's a good sign. Let's see. Not many other questions popping up in the premium Discord. Guys in YouTube chat, gals in YouTube chat, how we looking over here? Any questions coming along? Matt, anything that you see in terms of late swap? Are you guys, when after lock comes, is it something, even if there's not a major injury, do you get into the late swap optimizer and tinker with lineups a lot? Is that something where you're looking to maybe try and figure out where the field might be, might not be, and make some swaps based on that? And if so, is there anything that you're looking at on the board today?
Yeah, I mean, late swap is, if you're not late swapping, you're not taking full advantage of your ROI. Like, you need to be late swapping if you're playing for serious volume. If you want to be a winning DFS player, you probably need to be late swapping. You want to, on lineups where you don't think you have a chance to win, you should give yourself more outs, even if that means making some more suboptimal plays than you were anticipating at the start of the night. We know that that DFS is about trying to maximize the times that you're going to finish up at the top of the leaderboard. It's not about min cashes. It's not about, just trying to break even. Like, you want to, when you're playing GPPs, you're going to lose a lot, and you want your wins to be big ones. So I think you have to be utilizing late swap if you're going to be a DFS GPP player. So it's really just going to come down to, like, you look at that 10:30 game, maybe you get some Ja in there. Like, he could be an interesting pivot. Maybe we go to some of those Suns guys we were talking about before. You get some Devin Booker in there, and you pivot away from, like a Giannis if your lineups are looking towards the lower side heading into that 8:30 window. So, but for sure, late swap is something that probably isn't talked about enough in the DFS industry, and it's something that you need to be doing when you're trailing, when you're not in that catbird seat, and you can afford to just eat the chalk.
Yeah, absolutely. That's definitely, I agree. I think it's something that's underrated and under-discussed in the industry. And a lot of us do it. And a lot of, I know a lot of people, a lot of our members are out there late swapping, and it's demanding because you've got to be here for a couple hours after lock. And it does help to, put the games on and actually just watch the games too. It helps your enjoyment of it. But yeah, I think it's a major part of the process. When you're doing that, you talked about if you're trailing, you can make some of those pivots that are maybe less optimal going in, but maybe circumstances have changed, or your circumstances have changed where, all right, everybody ahead of you is going to have that guy who was supremely optimal. So we want to go to one of these guys who was maybe less. What kind of things are you looking for to maybe identify those spots, just for people who haven't really heard us talk about it all that much?
Yeah, you need to find out who, like, the key guys are. If there's somebody in that 7:00 window that's going to go for 10x value and you don't have them, then you probably should consider coming off the chalk. If you do have them, those are the types, like, if you have the guys that have hit in the early window, then you can kind of stay with your plan. You can play the safer plays, the guys that you were intending to play the whole time. Late swap is kind of like the ability to change things up on the fly when things aren't working out for you. So, like in the 7:00 window, we had the Heat versus the Pacers. Let's say you were fading Jimmy Butler and Jimmy Butler goes for like 60 tonight. You're probably going to need to pivot off of your Giannis teams, all the teams that have the like the chalk plays in there. You're going to need to get a little bit weird, because that's really the only way that you're going to come out on the right side of things. And it's not going to work more often than not. A lot of the times you're going to make your lineups worse, but we're just trying to play for that percentage chance that the chalk busts, our pivots hit, and that kind of gets us back into things.
Yeah, absolutely. It's something where, to your point, yeah, you're making these changes, guys, and you're knowing that, hey, I'm probably making this lineup worse. I'm probably going to finish with fewer points than I would have had originally with that better build that I put in originally. But we're looking for that upside. We're looking for that outlier lineup where we have to pass so much of the field that's now ahead of us by virtue of that Butler play, plus the field that we pivot away from. Let's not forget with the Giannis play that, yeah, you have to accelerate beyond that to such a degree that it's not going to come up that often. But when it does, it's going to probably be tournament winning or at least night changing, where you can take a losing dog of a night where, all right, maybe we broke even, maybe we came in $100 down or whatever it is, and you can turn that into a night where you win a few $1,000 to many thousands of dollars. So it's just totally worth doing. It's just that emergency bailout button on a slate of lineups like you were talking about there. So we've got about 8 minutes left in the show here. Just looking around, see if we've got any other questions, see if we got any news. Doesn't look like the news channel's highlighted. Holiday and Hood. Yeah, this is some old news that we've got here. So nothing over there. Popping over to the YouTube chat. Shell SB got cute and faded Giannis altogether. That may come back to bite me. Yeah, that one might come back to bite. Giannis was somebody that we both liked a lot. Are there any Giannis props on the board that you want to talk about with the PrizePicks?
Yeah, let's take a look at Giannis. I would imagine that his numbers are going to be among the highest in the scoring categories and for sure the rebounding categories. Let's see exactly where these numbers are at.
It looks like on the points, he's at a 28.5, which, certainly Giannis, you think is more than capable of going over that, but it's a tall order for a prop bet. It looks like Alex has it coming in 53% of the time on the under. So he's liking it to go a little bit under and only a 10% ROI. So maybe if you're making the bet, you're not going to make that bet, but maybe on PrizePicks, it's a spot where you can chase the under a little bit. It's just not a major payout at only 10% ROI. I think there are better bets on the board, but with a 53% win probability, you can maybe get away with sticking that into a PrizePicks. What are you seeing on?
It's an interesting number, right? 28.5. Because you look at opening night, he posted a 42.6% usage rate and he had 32 points. That's an outlier usage night. And he didn't smash that 28 number. Now, there were factors working against him. He wasn't great from the field. He was 12 for 25 for Giannis. That's very subpar. And he played only 31 minutes in a game that turned into a blowout. So I think the number is pretty accurate. I don't see like a ton of value one way or the other. It sounds like that's kind of how Alex has this one graded out as well. So I don't know if we necessarily need to take a stand on any of those Giannis props, but certainly like the upside is there for the 40-point game. Like we know that that's within his range of outcomes.
Yeah, absolutely. And it looks like, he's similar across the board. The spot where you're getting him the most likely to succeed is the over on his assists. His assist mark is at 4.5. Alex has him projected for 5+, 58% probability of hitting, but this one's only at an 8% ROI. So, if we're hunting for bets, it's not the best thing in the world to do with player props on Giannis for in terms of profit. 12.5 rebound line as well, coming in around 52%. So it's not the greatest spot in the world. Looking at the rebound lines again here, though, since I did land on this page as I was going through, one of the more significant ones to come up on the board here, Jay Crowder, a player that we didn't really talk about in terms of DFS, a guy who's not really a standout in terms of monumental upside, but a guy who does fill a lot of categories when he's out there on the court and can occasionally stick together an upside type game just from doing things in multiple categories. So on the prop line, 5.5 rebounds, we've got him coming in under that a pretty significant amount of the time, which I'm surprised by, I think, but it might just be the amount of run that he's going to get. What do you think of that one?
Yeah, that's an interesting one because he played almost 35 minutes in their last game. Yeah. He's a significant part of that Phoenix rotation. He's had at least 6 boards in both games this season. So I don't know if I feel super comfortable with the under on 5.5, to be honest with you.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. Was just the minutes that he sees, and just he's an effective rebounder at worst. I don't have his rebounding rate right in front of me, but I mean, I feel like he's capable of that. But we're showing it's on the site, and again, this is a default to Alex's numbers kind of a situation. Default to what the tools say. They're doing this math a lot better than we are in our heads. We've got that coming up as the under 75% expected win rate, 41% ROI. That's a pretty solid bet, and one that's kind of wouldn't have been on my radar at all, and probably one that a lot of people out there are going to get wrong, assuming that we're tracking well with those numbers. So I like that one. I think it makes some sense over on PrizePicks as well. Any others? Call it a last call out here for PrizePicks. Any others that jump off the page that you want to give the people before we jump?
Oh, one thing that I did find interesting was, like, we had talked about the under on the Drew Holiday assist prop, and it does make sense that if we're going to take the under there, like, the assists are going to have to come from somewhere. So it's not surprising to me that leads to the Giannis over, right? Like, I could see those being slightly correlated. So I think that makes some sense. We also have that a DeMar DeRozan assist prop popping pretty heavily in our prop tool. He has a 71% expected win rate on that, over a 40% expected return on investment. DeMar DeRozan, like, credit to him. He has taken a step forward with his game. He used to be a guy that was simply out there to score the ball. He's become a much more well-rounded player, but he's just not needed as a distributor for the most part with the Bulls, right? They have Lonzo operating as that traditional point guard. Zach LaVine can pass. They have Caruso. So I don't think DeMar is going to be a guy that's going to be necessarily like a 5 assist per game type player like he was last year. So I think that the under on that does make a lot of sense.
Yeah, you got to love it coming to the new team and just say, hey, we love the growth in your game over the last few years. Let's throw that all out the window and just focus on scoring, because we got some other guys who are going to do distribution of the ball. I totally agree with you there, particularly with Lonzo there. I mean, he's a traditional type point guard and a very good distributor of the basketball, so it makes a lot of sense. I like that call. The one question we got in the YouTube chat, Greg SJ1 asks, who am I liking for baseball tonight? I am liking the Atlanta Braves to close that series out and take it to the World Series. Hell with the Dodgers. Braves are the only team I've been rooting for since the Yankees got eliminated. This has just been not a good slate of baseball teams to choose from for a Yankees fan. What about you, Matt? Any rooting interest in this one for a NL East rival? Is that you pulling the other way?
Yeah, I mean, I hate the Braves. I hate the Dodgers too, but I have plenty of exposure on them winning the World Series. When they fell behind the Giants, I kind of got some money in. I thought that those odds were pretty good on them still to win the World Series. And there you have decent odds right now to win the World Series. And until the Dodgers are out, until they are buried, I think they're the favorites. I know they've had a lot of injuries, but that is just the most talented baseball team that I think that I've ever seen assembled. So until they're out, they're my pick.
Loaded. Yeah, loaded all-star team of a team, just up and down. And they lose a guy and they replace him with another all-star. It's amazing. It's been that way all season. Somehow didn't win their division. Won the most games in Dodgers history, if I'm not mistaken, and didn't win their division because the Giants just never relented until that great division series that they played. But yeah, it's going to be a fun game. I'm looking forward to watching that. I'm looking forward to jumping over, making some late swaps, watching some basketball tonight. If you're looking forward to watching sports content, we've got a load of it for you tomorrow. Sunday, big football Sunday. It kicks off. We've got some video on demand videos that Josh is going to put up there with his contenders videos for NFL. And then the live shows kick off at 9:45 in the morning over on the Odds channel. We've got the Awesemo betting show with Pete and Ben. Then we jump over to the DFS channel, the traditional one that you're on right now. The NFL First Look starts at 9:50. I might have these times wrong. I'm not sure if I cut the times off. Somewhere early in the morning, 9 o'clock, I think, for the start of that show, and 9 o'clock for the betting show. It looks like I cut a column off here. But the first NFL First Look starts up with Josh and Adam. That's followed by the deep dive with Lofty, Ben, and Alex, followed by Live Before Lock with Eric, you, Matt, with Matt Savoca, and Matt Gajeski. We got a lot of Matts running around here. Then the Awesemo Fantasy Football Show runs at the same time concurrently as that one with Eitan and Nick over on the Fantasy Football channel for the season-long fans, finding out all the ins and outs and everything. Then later in the day, we've got NBA content. We've got NBA Live Before Lock coming up at 6 o'clock, 6 to 7, taking into Live Before Lock. Looks like you, Matt, are going to be back for that show.
Yes.
I've got it as to be decided. If anybody's making the schedule, I'm around. I had fun doing this show with you, Matt, and I'm happy to jump on there with you again. And then we're rounding things out with the NFL Sunday Night Showdown show. That's going to be me, Emac, and Nick closing out the night. So we appreciate everybody hanging out. Come back tomorrow, hang out. That's been Matt. I've been Terry. I'll see you later. Good luck tonight.